Have you ever wondered why people can control you without ever raising their voice, forcing your hand, or even making it obvious? The truth is, the most dangerous manipulations are silent. The mirror effect, gaslighting, guilt-seeding, the decoy effect, and so many others you've just discovered. These psychological tricks are everywhere, at work, in relationships, in politics, and even in the ads you scroll past every day. And the scariest part? Most of the time, you don't even realize it's happening until it's too late. That's why knowledge is your only defense. If you want to break free from hidden control and reclaim your power, don't just watch this. Make it a turning point. Hit that subscribe button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and let's expose the manipulations together before they expose us. Mirror effect. The mirror effect is one of the most powerful yet subtle psychological tools we can use in human interaction. At its core, it's the art of reflecting back the behavior, tone, or energy of another person in such a way that they feel more connected to you. People are naturally drawn to familiarity. When someone sees their own mannerisms, words, or emotions echoed back at them, their subconscious interprets it as a sign of similarity, safety, and trust. This is why mirroring becomes such a potent method for persuasion, influence, and even manipulation when used with intention. The roots of the mirror effect lie in our evolutionary wiring. From birth, humans are designed to imitate others as a way to bond and learn. Babies copy their parents' facial expressions. Children adopt the speech patterns of those around them, and even adults unconsciously mimic their friends' gestures and tone over time. Scientists have discovered mirror neurons in the brain, which fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else doing it. These neurons allow us to feel what others feel, helping us relate deeply and build empathy. This is why mirroring is so effective. It works below the level of conscious awareness. One of the most common uses of mirroring is in body language. Imagine you are speaking with someone who leans forward. If you gently lean forward too, they'll feel an unspoken bond. If they cross their arms or legs, and you subtly do the same a few moments later, their subconscious mind registers harmony. If they gesture with their hands while explaining, and you incorporate similar movements in your response, they'll feel that you are aligned with them. The key is subtlety. If you mirror too obviously, it looks fake and awkward, but when done with natural timing, it creates a silent sense of trust and comfort. Mirroring isn't just physical, it ends into speech and communication. If someone speaks slowly and calmly, matching their pace makes them feel at ease. If they speak in short, energetic bursts, adjusting your tone to match creates a rhythm of connection. Even the choice of words matters. If someone uses casual language, you respond casually. If they use more formal expressions, you reflect that back. This makes them feel like you get them on an instinctive level, without them consciously noticing why. Perhaps the most powerful form of mirroring lies in emotions. Humans are deeply influenced by the emotional states of those around them. When someone shares a joyful story, reflecting their excitement makes them feel heard and validated. When someone expresses sadness or frustration, acknowledging it by matching their tone, rather than trying to instantly cheer them up, makes them feel understood. This technique is why therapists, negotiators, and skilled communicators use mirroring so effectively. It creates empathy, lowers defenses, and makes conversations flow smoothly. Because of this, the mirror effect is widely used in persuasion and influence. Politicians mirror the energy of their audience, salespeople mirror the mood of their clients, and leaders mirror the emotions of their teams to create connection. In everyday life, mirroring accelerates bonding and friendships, makes dating interactions feel natural, and even eases conflict resolution. In high-stakes negotiations, subtly matching the opponent's posture or speech patterns can soften resistance and build alignment. But like any psychological tool, mirroring has a darker side. Manipulators and con artists exploit it to create a false sense of intimacy. They will copy interests, emotions, and habits too quickly or too perfectly, making their targets feel as if they've found someone who truly understands them. Once trust is established, the manipulator may then exploit that bond for personal gain. The danger is that by the time the victim realizes, they have already lowered their guard. The best defense is awareness. If someone seems to mirror you too quickly, or if their personality shifts dramatically depending on who they're talking to, it could be a sign of deceptive mirroring. When used ethically, however, the mirror effect is an incredible tool. It allows us to strengthen relationships, make great first impressions, and influence people naturally without force. When applied with subtlety, it builds effortless rapport and smooth social interactions, whether in professional networking, building friendships, or deepening romantic bonds. Mirroring allows us to step into someone else's world and meet them where they are. By understanding how and when to use it, you can become more persuasive, more likable, and more in control of your social presence, while also recognizing when it's being used on you. Foot in the door technique. The foot in the door technique is one of the most fascinating and effective psychological strategies used to influence human behavior. At first glance, it looks simple. You ask for something small, and once the other person agrees, you gradually build up to a bigger request. But beneath this simple trick lies a deep psychological truth. The human brain craves consistency. Once we commit to something, no matter how minor, we feel an internal push to remain aligned with that decision. Saying yes once makes us far more likely to say yes again, even when the request grows larger. Think about it. Most people don't like to see themselves as inconsistent or unreliable. When we take even a small action, we unconsciously adjust our self-image to match that action. If you agree to sign a petition about protecting the environment, your brain now sees you as someone who cares about the environment. Later, if you're asked to donate money to the same cause, refusing would clash with the new identity you've already accepted. To avoid the discomfort of inconsistency, you're more likely to comply with the bigger request. This is why the foot-in-the-door technique is so effective. It doesn't just influence actions, it reshapes identity. Marketers and salespeople rely heavily on this method. Free trials and product samples are classic examples. Once you've tried a product, you've already taken the first step of commitment. From there, subscribing or purchasing feels natural. After all, you're already a user of the product. Salespeople may ask you to try on a jacket or test drive a car, knowing that once you engage in the small action, your likelihood of buying increases dramatically. Charities also use it cleverly by first asking you to sign up for a newsletter or share a campaign on social media. Once you've done something small to support the cause, I know you're more likely to donate money later. But this technique doesn't just live in sales and marketing. It's everywhere in daily life. A coworker may start by asking you to review a short document, then later request help on a large project. A friend may first borrow a small amount of money, then feel more comfortable asking for a bigger loan. Even in relationships, this tactic can appear subtly. Small requests for compromises or sacrifices that gradually grow into larger demands. Over time, what began as harmless agreement can snowball into deep patterns of compliance. One of the reasons this method works so smoothly is because it doesn't feel like manipulation in the moment. Each new step feels like a natural continuation of the previous one. You rarely notice the trap being set because the escalation is gradual. If someone asked you for a huge favor up front, you'd probably say no. But if they ease you into it step by step, your own psychology does half the work for them. However, the foot-in-the-door technique also has a much darker side. It is frequently used by manipulators, abusers, and even cult leaders. They start with small, seemingly harmless requests. Just attend one meeting. Just help me this once. Just let me decide this little thing. But each small yes builds momentum, leading to bigger and bigger compliance. Before long, the victim finds themselves saying yes to demands that they never would have agreed to at the beginning. The slow, incremental nature of this technique makes it incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands because it bypasses rational resistance and exploits the need to appear consistent. Scams and fraud schemes also exploit this principle. Many scams begin with a minor purchase or small investment. Once a person has given money, even a little, they feel more committed to the scheme. Pulling out later would mean admitting they were wrong or inconsistent. So instead, they double down and invest even more, falling deeper into the trap. Abusive relationships often follow this same cycle, where control starts small, tiny restrictions or subtle guilt trips, before escalating into full emotional or physical dominance. The best defense against this manipulation is awareness. Whenever you notice yourself agreeing to increasingly larger requests, pause and ask yourself, am I doing this because I truly want to, or because I already said yes to something smaller? Consistency is a natural human tendency, but it should never control your freedom of choice. Saying no is always an option, no matter how many small yeses came before. Recognizing that each decision should stand on its own, not on what came before, gives you back your power. That said, when used ethically, the foot-in-the-door technique can be a force for good. Parents use it to build positive habits in children by starting small, like asking them to tidy up one toy, before gradually teaching them to clean their whole room. Coaches use it to help athletes push boundaries by first setting small, achievable goals. Therapists may use it to guide clients toward major changes by starting with small, manageable actions. In these cases, the technique builds momentum, confidence, and long-term commitment in healthy ways. Ultimately, the foot-in-the-door technique shows us the incredible power of small beginnings. A single small step can change how we see ourselves, and once that self-image shifts, our behavior follows. Whether it's used to inspire growth or to exploit trust depends on the intent of the person to pull. Ying it. When you understand how it works, you can protect yourself from manipulation while also using it to create positive, lasting change in your own life. Door-in-the-face technique. The door-in-the-face technique is one of the most clever and effective persuasion strategies ever discovered. It works by making an initial request so large, so unrealistic, or so unreasonable that the other person is almost certain to refuse. But here's where the magic happens. After that first no, you immediately follow it up with a much smaller, more reasonable request. And because of the contrast between the two requests, the second one feels like a fair compromise, even if that's what you were aiming for all along. At its core, this method plays on the psychological principle of reciprocity and the natural human discomfort with saying no. When someone turns down a request, they often feel a subtle sense of guilt or obligation. They don't want to seem selfish or uncooperative. So, when the smaller request is made afterward, they're far more likely to agree in order to balance out the interaction. This creates the illusion of compromise. You backed Dissonance from your huge request, and now they feel they should meet you halfway. Let's look at how this works in real life. Imagine a charity worker knocks on your door and asks you for a $500 donation. You immediately refuse. It's too much. But then they say, "I understand, but could you at least give $20 to help the cause?" Suddenly, 20 feels like nothing compared to 500, and you feel more inclined to say yes. This was the goal all along. The large request was never meant to be accepted. It was simply the setup for the smaller one. Salespeople use this tactic constantly. A car dealer might first show you a high-priced luxury model that's far outside your budget. Once you reject it, they guide you toward a mid-range option, which suddenly feels like a bargain by comparison. In truth, the mid-range car may have been the one they wanted to sell you from the start. Real estate agents do the same, showing clients overpriced or unattractive homes first, so that when they present the real option they want to sell, it looks much more appealing. The contrast makes the real deal feel irresistible. But this technique isn't limited to business. In everyday life, we use it without even realizing. A teenager might ask their parents for an outrageous favor, like buying them the newest, most expensive gadget, knowing it will be rejected. But once the parents say no, the teen follows up with a smaller request, such as getting a less expensive version. The parents, feeling like they've already said no once, are more likely to agree to the second request, thinking they're being fair. Similarly, an employee might ask their boss for a 20% raise, expecting rejection, only to follow up with a compromise request of 10%. Suddenly, 10% feels reasonable, even though it was the true goal all along. The reason this works so well is because of how the human brain interprets fairness. People dislike rejecting others completely. Saying no creates tension, and the second request becomes a way to relieve that tension. The person feels as if they are maintaining balance. I can't give everything, but I can give something. And in that moment, the manipulator has achieved exactly what they wanted. But just like other persuasion techniques, the door in the face can also be twisted into darker forms of manipulation. Toxic relationships often use this tactic to establish control. For example, a controlling partner may demand something extreme, like forbidding their partner from going out altogether. When the partner resists, the manipulator compromises by allowing them to go out, but only under strict rules and conditions. To the victim, this feels like a win compared to the first demand, but in reality, they've still lost their freedom. The manipulator never intended the extreme request to succeed. It was only bait to make the smaller restriction seem reasonable. In workplaces, Bosses may use this to push employees into compliance. They might ask for something wildly unreasonable, like completing a huge project in a single day. When the employee objects, the boss scales it back to just a tight deadline of 3 days. Grateful for the compromise, the employee agrees, even though the demand is still unfair. This is the hidden danger of the door in the face. It makes unreasonable requests appear acceptable simply by comparison. So, how do you defend yourself against it? The key is awareness. If someone makes an initial request that feels absurd or clearly unrealistic, don't assume their second request is automatically reasonable. Ask yourself, if I had only heard the second request on its own, without the first one, would I still agree to it? By separating the requests in your mind, you can evaluate them more objectively and avoid being manipulated by the contrast effect. It's important to note that the door-in-the-face technique isn't always unethical. In fact, it can be used in positive ways. Teachers often use it to motivate students. They may start with a large assignment, knowing that when they reduce it to a smaller task, students feel relieved and are more willing to complete it. Coaches use it with athletes, setting tough goals first, then scaling back to more achievable ones, which motivates effort. Nonprofits use it to maximize donations while still ensuring participation. In these cases, the tactic is about encouragement and engagement, not exploitation. At its heart, the door-in-the-face technique is a psychological dance between rejection and acceptance. It demonstrates how much our decisions are influenced not by logic, but by contrast and perceived fairness. Whether it's used for good or for manipulation depends entirely on the intention behind it. By understanding how it works, you gain 2 advantages. The ability to use it ethically to persuade others, and the power to recognize when it's being used against you. Once you see the pattern, you can step outside of it, think clearly, and make choices based on your real values, not on clever tricks of comparison. The Zynic Effect. The Zynic effect, more accurately known as the Zynic effect, is one of the most intriguing psychological discoveries about the way our minds work. It explains why unfinished tasks, unresolved conversations, and incomplete experiences cling to our thoughts far more strongly than the ones we've already completed. The phenomenon was first studied by Russian psychologist Bluma Zygarnik, who noticed that waiters in restaurants remembered unpaid orders with incredible accuracy, but quickly forgot the details once the bills were settled. In other words, the brain naturally keeps unfinished business alive, holding on to it with a sense of urgency until it's resolved. Think about your own life. How many times have you struggled to sleep because of an unfinished conversation, a project left halfway, or an argument that didn't reach closure? Your mind replays it over and over, searching for resolution. That's the Zynic effect in action. The brain sees incompleteness as a problem that must be solved, and until it is, it continues to occupy valuable mental space. Completed tasks, on the other hand, fade away more easily because the mind has already closed the loop. This principle is everywhere around us, especially in entertainment and storytelling. Cliffhangers are perhaps the most obvious example. When a TV episode ends with a shocking twist or an unanswered question, your brain refuses to let go. You feel compelled to watch the next episode just to find out what happens. Streaming platforms thrive on this effect, which is why binge watching is so addictive. Each episode leaves something unresolved, pulling you deeper and deeper into the story. Authors, filmmakers, and even advertisers use the same principle to keep your attention hooked. But the Zynic effect doesn't just explain why we love cliffhangers. It also affects our productivity. Many people find it hard to begin a task, but once they start, even in a small way, the brain begins to create tension around finishing it. That's why beginning a project, even with the tiniest action, often makes it easier to follow through. Writers sometimes stop mid-sentence on purpose so that when they return, their brain is already engaged, eager to finish the incomplete thought. Students who start studying even one small section of material often find it easier to continue, simply because their brain doesn't want to leave it half done. Marketers also weaponize this effect. Headlines like, "The secret to success no one talks about," or "You won't believe what happens next," create an open loop in your mind. You feel the need to click because your brain wants closure. Sales strategies work the same way. Limited time offers, teasers about exclusive deals inside, or ads that hint at a mystery solution all exploit the Zynic effect to make you continue engaging until you have satisfied your curiosity. This principle even shapes our relationships and emotions. When you argue with someone and don't reach closure, the brain replays the event again and again. You imagine what you could have said differently. You rehearse alternative outcomes in your head. The unresolved state keeps you mentally tied to the situation, often creating unnecessary stress and anxiety. In relationships, unresolved conflicts can create years of mental loops, making it difficult to move forward. The darker side of the Zynic effect is that it can fuel overthinking, perfectionism, and intrusive thoughts. Perfectionists often struggle to finish projects because they can't close the loop until it feels perfect. People suffering from anxiety often find themselves mentally trapped in cycles of unresolved fears or what-ifs, unable to let go. Even in trauma, the Zynic effect plays a role, as the mind replays unprocessed events in search of closure. Therapists understand this and often design interventions to help people consciously close the loop. Techniques in cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, focus on reframing unresolved issues or deliberately giving closure to intrusive thoughts. Writing down unfinished tasks is another powerful tool because it externalizes the open loops. Once the task is on paper, the brain feels less burdened, as if part of the responsibility has been resolved. On the positive side, the Zynic effect can be harnessed to boost motivation and productivity. By intentionally leaving small tasks unfinished, you can trigger your brain to push you toward completing them. Starting with tiny actions creates psychological momentum. Breaking down large projects into smaller chunks ensures that your brain always has a manageable open loop to focus on, which prevents procrastination and fuels progress. The key to mastering the Zynic effect is balance. Use it to your advantage by starting tasks, creating small open loops, and letting your brain drive you toward completion. But also be mindful of when it turns against you, when unfinished business becomes an endless cycle of stress, anxiety, or overthinking. In those moments, consciously close the loop, write it down, reframe it, or accept that not everything needs to be perfectly resolved. At its core, the Zynic effect reveals a simple but powerful truth. The human mind is designed to chase calm. Pigan. We are wired to seek closure, to tie loose ends, to finish what we start. Understanding this phenomenon gives you an advantage in life. You can use it to stay productive, to capture attention, and to manage your own mental energy. But just as importantly, it allows you to recognize when your brain is trapping you in unfinished cycles, so you can step back, close the loop, and free yourself. Guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is one of the most subtle yet powerful tools of manipulation. At its core, it is the act of making someone feel guilty or responsible for a situation in order to influence their behavior. Instead of asking directly for what they want, manipulators twist emotions so that saying no feels cruel, selfish, or heartless. The victim isn't guided by free will, but by the heavy burden of guilt placed on their shoulders. This tactic works because human beings are wired to seek approval and avoid conflict. Deep inside, we want to be seen as good, kind, and caring. When someone frames us as the bad person for not meeting their needs, we feel compelled to give in just to restore our self-image. The manipulator doesn't force compliance with threats or aggression. They make us punish ourselves with guilt until we cave in. One of the most common ways guilt tripping shows up is through passive-aggressive remarks. Phrases like, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me," or "I guess I'll just do it myself," aren't straightforward requests. They're emotional traps. They're designed to make you feel like you're failing someone, even if their expectations are unfair. Instead of openly communicating, the guilt tripper plants seeds of shame, hoping you'll act to ease the discomfort. In families, guilt tripping can become a toxic cycle. A parent might say, "If you really loved me, you'd call more often," turning a simple desire for communication into a moral judgment. Romantic partners may weaponize guilt in relationships with lines like, "If you cared about us, you wouldn't go out with your friends tonight." Suddenly, what could have been a personal choice is reframed as betrayal. Over time, the victim begins to equate independence with cruelty, losing the ability to say no without drowning in guilt. Workplaces are another environment where guilt tripping thrives. A boss might say, I thought you were a team player, but if you can't stay late, I guess I was wrong. Colleagues may remind you of past favors. I covered for you last week. Don't you think you should return the favor? These comments play on the natural human desire to appear loyal, dependable, and cooperative. Many employees give in, not because they want to, but because they fear being labeled selfish or ungrateful. The danger of guilt tripping is that it slowly erodes autonomy. When someone is constantly manipulated through guilt, they begin to lose the ability to make decisions based on their true desires. They start living in a pattern of people-pleasing, where their main motivation is not to disappoint others. This not only drains emotional energy, but also destroys self-worth. Over time, victims may even associate self-care with selfishness, feeling guilty for prioritizing their own needs. Manipulators prefer guilt tripping because it's indirect and less obvious than outright control. Unlike anger or threats, guilt is a quiet weapon. It allows them to maintain an image of innocence while making the victim feel like the bad guy. The victim, weighed down by shame, often ends up apologizing or overcompensating, even when they did nothing wrong. This makes guilt tripping a highly effective way to control behavior without appearing aggressive. But guilt tripping is not always loud and obvious. It can also be subtle. It might come as a disappointed sigh, a heavy silence, or a look of disapproval. These unspoken signals are powerful because they trigger the imagination. The victim starts to fill in the gaps, blaming themselves and trying to fix things that were never their responsibility. The silence itself becomes a weapon, leaving the target scrambling for forgiveness. So how do you defend against guilt tripping? The first step is awareness. Recognize the difference between a genuine request and emotional manipulation. If someone tries to make you feel guilty for setting a healthy boundary, pause and ask yourself, am I really doing something wrong, or are they trying to control me through guilt? Often the guilt belongs to them, not you. The second step is setting firm boundaries. Respond calmly but firmly with statements like, I understand how you feel, but I need to do what's best for me. This acknowledges their emotions without taking on responsibility for them. Avoid over-explaining or apologizing excessively. That only feeds the guilt trap. By staying grounded and confident in your choice, you strip the manipulator of their power. It's also important to remember that everyone is responsible for their own feelings. A manipulator may try to convince you that your choices are causing their sadness, disappointment, or stress. But in reality, their emotions are theirs to manage. You can show empathy without carrying the weight of responsibility for their happiness. The moment you stop owning guilt that doesn't belong to you, the guilt trip loses its power. When used ethically, guilt can sometimes serve as a healthy compass, guiding us to reflect on mistakes and make amends. But when weaponized, it becomes a tool of control. The difference lies in intent. True guilt inspires growth, while manipulative guilt chains you to someone else's expectations. In the end, guilt tripping thrives on silence and unconscious compliance. The more you recognize it, the less it can touch you. You don't need to justify every boundary, and you don't need to sacrifice your well-being just to keep others comfortable. True relationships, whether in family, friendships, or love, should be built on honesty, not emotional coercion. When you learn to stand firm against guilt trips, you reclaim not only your choices, but also your self-respect. Triangulation is one of the most manipulative tactics used in human relationships, yet it often hides in plain sight. At its core, triangulation happens when a person brings a third party into a conflict or situation in order to gain control, create division, or increase their influence. Instead of addressing issues directly, the manipulator introduces another person, sometimes openly, sometimes subtly, to shift the dynamics in their favor. This tactic thrives on confusion, comparison, and insecurity. And the dangerous part? It can appear in families, friendships, workplaces, and romantic relationships alike. The essence of triangulation lies in creating imbalance. By inserting a third party, the manipulator avoids direct confrontation and instead forces their target to compete for attention, approval, or validation. This tactic makes the target question themselves, feel jealous, or even doubt their own worth. Meanwhile, the manipulator sits comfortably in the middle, controlling the flow of information and emotions. One of the clearest examples of triangulation happens in toxic romantic relationships. Imagine a partner who constantly brings up another person, a coworker, an ex, or even a fictional admirer in conversations. They may say things like, "You never compliment me the way Sarah does," or "My ex always understood me better." These comparisons are not innocent. They're designed to create insecurity. The victim begins to feel they are not enough and starts working harder to prove their value, while the manipulator enjoys the power of watching them scramble for validation. Triangulation is just as common in dysfunctional workplaces. A boss might pit employees against each other by saying, "John always stays late. Maybe you should try being more committed like him." By doing this, the boss fosters competition, jealousy, and rivalry, keeping employees distracted from the real problem, the manipulative management style. Gossip is another form of workplace triangulation. By telling selective stories to different people, manipulators shape perceptions and control how others see one another. This ensures that mistrust and division grow, while the manipulator remains the one everyone seeks approval from. Family dynamics are perhaps the breeding ground where triangulation is most destructive. Parents might compare siblings to one another. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" planting seeds of resentment and rivalry that can last a lifetime. In these cases, the manipulator strengthens their control by making siblings compete for love and attention. Instead of creating unity, the family environment becomes fractured, with the manipulator positioned as the authority figure who benefits from the chaos. The reason triangulation works so effectively is that it thrives on emotional instability. When people feel uncertain about where they stand in a relationship, they are more vulnerable to control. The manipulator leverages this insecurity by deciding how information is shared, which comparisons are made, and who gets attention. It creates a fog of confusion where the victim no longer sees the manipulator as the problem, but instead views the third party as the threat. In reality, the manipulator is orchestrating the entire dynamic. The long-term impact of triangulation can be devastating. In relationships, it destroys trust and self-worth. The victim begins to doubt their value, believing they must constantly compete for affection. In workplaces, it erodes teamwork and replaces collaboration with rivalry. In families, it creates scars that last for decades, leaving siblings divided and children desperate for approval. Ultimately, triangulation isolates people, leaving them more dependent on the manipulator who controls the angle. So, how do you protect yourself from triangulation? The answer is simple in theory, but challenging in practice. Direct communication. If someone tries to manipulate you by inserting a third party, refuse to engage in the game. Address issues head-on. For example, if a partner constantly compares you to someone else, calmly say, "If you have an issue with me, let's talk about it directly, without involving other people." If a boss tries to make you compete with a colleague, focus on the real issue, the work, not the rivalry. Setting boundaries is also essential. Recognize the signs early, when someone tries to pit people against each other, when they constantly create jealousy, or when they play messenger between parties instead of addressing things openly. By refusing to participate, you weaken their power. A manipulator thrives in secrecy and indirectness. Honesty and directness are their greatest enemies. It's also important to detach emotionally from the comparisons. When someone brings up another person in a way that makes you feel insecure, pause and remind yourself, this is a tactic. The manipulator wants you to feel threatened, so you'll work harder to win them over. Don't fall into the trap. Instead, recognize that the problem lies in their manipulation, not in your worth. Triangulation thrives in environments of insecurity, rivalry, and silence. But when you step back and see the pattern, the fog clears. You begin to realize that you don't need to compete for approval, and you don't need to play games to earn someone's attention. True relationships, whether with partners, family, friends, or colleagues, are built on honesty, respect, and direct communication. The moment you refuse to play the triangle, you remove the manipulator's greatest weapon. Triangulation loses its grip when you step out of the game and reclaim your right to healthy, balanced connections. The silent treatment. The silent treatment is one of the most insidious and painful forms of emotional manipulation. Unlike shouting, arguing, or open confrontation, this tactic works through absence, through silence. It is the deliberate act of refusing to communicate, acknowledge, or respond to someone in order to punish them, gain control, or make them feel insignificant. On the surface, it looks like avoidance, but in reality, it is a powerful weapon designed to inflict emotional distress. the silent treatment preys on one of the deepest human needs, the need for connection and validation. As social beings, we are wired to seek acknowledgement. When someone ignores us completely, refusing to speak, refusing to answer, refusing to even recognize our presence, it triggers deep feelings of rejection. This emotional pain is often compared to physical pain in the brain. Studies have shown that social exclusion activates the same neural pathways as physical injury. That's why the silent treatment can feel unbearable, even more damaging than direct confrontation. In relationships, the silent treatment often appears after disagreements or conflicts. Instead of communicating openly, a partner might shut down completely, leaving the other person in confusion and distress. Hours or even days of silence can pass, with the victim replaying the argument over and over, questioning what they did wrong, and desperately trying to fix the situation. This dynamic puts all the power in the hands of the person withholding communication. They control when the silence begins and when it ends, forcing the victim into a position of helplessness. Families are also no strangers to the silent treatment. Parents may punish children by ignoring them or withdrawing affection, teaching them early on that love and attention are conditional. Siblings may use it to express anger without words, creating distance instead of resolution. Over time, this pattern can deeply scar individuals, leaving them with unresolved feelings of worthlessness or fear of abandonment. In the workplace, the silent treatment can become a toxic form of professional punishment. A boss might freeze out an employee, ignoring their contributions in meetings, withholding feedback, or refusing to acknowledge their presence. Colleagues may use silence as a weapon of exclusion, pretending someone doesn't exist in group settings. These behaviors erode self-esteem, foster isolation, and create hostile environments where communication and trust break down completely. The manipulative power of the silent treatment lies in its ability to make the victim blame themselves. Instead of questioning the manipulator's behavior, the victim often spirals into self-doubt. They wonder what they did to deserve the silence. They over-apologize, over-explain, or bend their boundaries just to restore communication. This shifts responsibility away from the manipulator, making the victim the one who feels guilty, ashamed, or desperate to make amends. But the silent treatment is not just about punishment, it's also about control. By withdrawing communication, the manipulator forces the victim into a position where they'll do almost anything to regain attention. It creates a dynamic where the manipulator holds power, while the victim is trapped in uncertainty. Over time, this dynamic can create deep dependency, where the victim fears losing the relationship altogether if they don't comply. The long-term effects of repeated silent treatment are profound. Victims often develop anxiety around communication, fearing rejection whenever conflict arises. They may become overly cautious, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering silence. Some may even internalize the belief that their feelings don't matter, silencing themselves before anyone else can. This damages confidence, trust, and emotional safety, creating wounds that can last long after the relationship ends. So, how do you defend against the silent treatment? The first step is to recognize it for what it is: manipulation. Not all silence is malicious. Sometimes people genuinely need time to cool down or process emotions. But when silence is used as a weapon to control, punish, or make you feel unworthy, it becomes emotional abuse. Recognizing this distinction is key. The second step is setting boundaries. Instead of chasing the manipulator for validation, calmly acknowledge the behavior. I see that you're not willing to talk right now. When you're ready to have a respectful conversation, I'm here. This shifts the dynamic. Instead of giving in to their control, you put responsibility back where it belongs, on the person refusing to communicate. Refusing to play the game deprives the manipulator of the power they're trying to hold over you. It's also important to protect your self-worth. Silence can make you feel invisible, but remind yourself, someone else's refusal to speak does not define your value. You are not responsible for forcing communication out of someone who chooses to withhold it. Healthy relationships are built on dialogue, not punishment. If silence becomes a repeated pattern, it may be a sign of deeper toxicity that requires distance or even separation for your own well-being. On the flip side, silence can be healthy when used intentionally and honestly. Taking a pause in the middle of conflict to calm down, reflect, or avoid saying something harmful is not the same as giving the silent treatment. The difference lies in intention. Healthy silence is temporary and respectful, with the goal of returning to communication. The silent treatment, however, is a tool of control and avoidance, designed to inflict pain rather than resolve issues. At its heart, the silent treatment teaches us one powerful truth. Communication is not just about words, it's about acknowledgement. When someone denies you that acknowledgement, they are not only refusing to listen, they are denying your existence in that moment. Recognizing this can give you the strength to step back, reclaim your voice, and refuse to be controlled by silence. Illusory truth effect. The illusory truth effect is one of the most unsettling psychological phenomena because it reveals just how fragile our sense of truth really is. At its core, this effect explains that the more often we hear something repeated, the more likely we are to believe it, regardless of whether it's actually true. Repetition alone can turn fiction into fact inside our minds, not because of evidence or logic, but because of the brain's tendency to confuse familiarity with accuracy. This effect works because the human brain is built for efficiency, not perfection. When we encounter information, our minds ask, "Does this feel familiar?" If the answer is yes, our brain takes a mental shortcut, assuming it must also be reliable. We don't always have the time or energy to fact-check every detail we hear, so instead we lean on familiarity as a stand-in for truth. That's why hearing the same claim multiple times, even from different sources, gradually erodes skepticism. Over time, what once sounded questionable begins to feel like common knowledge. This principle is everywhere in modern life. Advertisers exploit it by repeating slogans, taglines, and jingles until they become etched in our memory. Political campaigns repeat key phrases endlessly, shaping public opinion not through reasoned debate, but through sheer repetition. Even gossip thrives on the illusory truth effect. The more a rumor is whispered and passed around, the more believable it becomes, regardless of how little evidence exists to support it. Social media has amplified this effect like never before. In the digital age, information spreads at lightning speed. A false claim can be shared thousands of times within hours, appearing on different platforms and accounts. To the human brain, this constant exposure makes the claim feel credible, even if every share traces back to the same unreliable arts. This is why misinformation and conspiracy theories gain so much traction online, not necessarily because people are gullible, but because repetition is persuasive on a subconscious level. But the illusory truth effect doesn't just shape beliefs about the world, it also shapes how we see ourselves. Consider the internal dialogue many people carry. If you repeatedly tell yourself, "I'm not good enough," or "I always fail," those words eventually feel true, even if they started as doubts or fears rather than facts. Negative self-talk, when repeated, plants seeds that grow into limiting beliefs. Over time, they harden into a distorted identity that feels undeniable, even though it's based on repetition, not reality. On the flip side, the illusory truth effect can also be used for good. Affirmations, mantras, and positive reinforcement all rely on the same principle. When you repeat empowering statements, "I am capable," "I deserve success," "I can overcome challenges," you slowly rewire the subconscious mind. The words you feed yourself every day begin to feel natural, shifting the way you think, act, and respond to the world. In this sense, repetition becomes a tool of transformation, not deception. The danger of the illusory truth effect lies in its subtlety. Unlike outright lies, which we can confront and reject, repeated falsehoods slip under the radar, shaping our beliefs gradually. It's not the single exposure that changes us. It's the drip, drip, drip of repetition over time. This is why propaganda has been so effective throughout history. Entire societies have been swayed not by evidence, but by slogans repeated until resistance fades. The human mind is not designed to withstand constant repetition without being influenced. So, how do we protect ourselves from this effect? The first step is awareness. Simply knowing that repetition can distort truth helps us pause before blindly accepting familiar claims. The second step is critical thinking, asking, where did this information come from? What evidence supports it? By actively questioning repeated claims, we interrupt the automatic link between familiarity and belief. Finally, diversifying the information we consume is crucial. If we only hear one narrative, repetition will cement it as truth. Exposing ourselves to multiple perspectives prevents a single repeated idea from dominating our perception. It's also important to monitor the stories we tell ourselves. Pay attention to the words you repeat internally, because they will shape your reality. If you find yourself stuck in cycles of negative self-talk, recognize that these thoughts may not be truth. They may simply be repetition. By consciously choosing more empowering narratives, you can harness the illusory truth effect to build confidence and resilience instead of self-doubt. At its core, the illusory truth effect is a reminder that truth is not always about facts. It's about perception. What feels true is not always what is true. By understanding this, you gain the power to step back, question repetition, and reclaim your ability to choose what you believe. In a world overflowing with repeated messages, this awareness may be the only shield we have against manipulation. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is one of the most dangerous and destructive forms of psychological manipulation. It doesn't involve physical force, loud threats, or direct control. It works by attacking your perception of reality itself. The term comes from a 1944 film called Gaslight, in which a husband manipulates his wife into believing she is going insane by dimming the gas lights in their home and then denying that the lights changed at all. Over time, the wife begins to doubt her own memory, senses, and sanity, becoming dependent on her manipulative husband for a version of truth. At its core, gaslighting is a campaign to make you question your own reality. The manipulator denies facts, twists your words, dismisses your emotions, or rewrites events until you no longer trust yourself. Once you doubt your own perception, the manipulator becomes the authority you rely on to interpret reality. This creates a dangerous imbalance of power, where they control not only what you believe, but how you see yourself. Gaslighting often begins subtly. A partner might say, "That never happened, you're remembering it wrong," after an argument. Or they might tell you, "You're too sensitive, you're overreacting," when you express pain. Over time, these small denials accumulate. You begin to second-guess your memory. You wonder if your emotions really are exaggerated. You ask yourself whether you're imagining things. The manipulator thrives in this doubt, because the less you trust yourself, the more you trust them. In relationships, gaslighting often takes the form of rewriting history. For example, if you recall a painful conversation, the manipulator may insist, "I never said that, you're making it up," or "You misunderstood me." They may even accuse you of being the one with the problem. "You're crazy, you always twist things." Eventually, the victim starts apologizing for things they never did wrong, trying desperately to hold on to the relationship. What began as love turns into dependency, with the victim relying on the abuser to tell them what is real. Gaslighting is not limited to romantic relationships. It can appear anywhere. In families, parents may gaslight children by denying abuse or neglect, saying things like, "You had a great childhood, you're just ungrateful," or "That never happened, you're imagining it." At work, a boss might gaslight employees by moving deadlines, denying promises, or shifting blame, then insisting, "I never told you that, you must have misunderstood." Even in politics and media, gaslighting is used to control entire groups, denying obvious facts and repeating false narratives until people feel powerless to trust their own judgment. The manipulative strength of gaslighting lies in its gradual erosion of self-trust. Victims don't lose their confidence overnight. It happens slowly, piece by piece. First, you doubt a memory. Then, you doubt your emotions. Eventually, you doubt your ability to make decisions at all. The manipulator uses this to tighten control. They might say, "Don't trust your friends, they're just trying to confuse you," or "You always get things wrong, let me handle it." Isolation follows, making the victim even more dependent. The emotional toll of gaslighting is devastating. Victims often feel confusion, anxiety, guilt, and shame. They walk on eggshells, terrified of being accused of misremembering or overreacting. Over time, this leads to chronic self-doubt, depression, and a sense of emptiness. Many survivors describe feeling like they lost themselves, like their identity was erased and replaced with the manipulator's version of reality. So, how do you defend yourself against gaslighting? The first step is awareness. If someone constantly dismisses your experiences, denies obvious truths, or makes you question your memory, recognize this as a red flag. Gaslighting is not about disagreement. It's about systematic denial and distortion meant to break your confidence. The second step is to document reality. Keep journals, screenshots, messages, or notes of important conversations. This is not about proving yourself to the manipulator. It's about anchoring yourself to the truth when your memory is attacked. Evidence helps you remember that what you experienced was real, even if someone tries to rewrite it. The third step is to set boundaries. When someone denies your reality, calmly but firmly assert, "I know what I experienced. I won't argue about it." Refuse to get trapped in circular debates where the manipulator twists words until you doubt yourself. The goal is not to convince them, it's to protect your sense of reality. And finally, surround yourself with truth tellers. Gaslighting thrives in isolation. Trusted friends, therapists, or support networks can serve as anchors to reality when you feel lost. Hearing others validate your experiences helps rebuild the trust in yourself that gaslighting tries to destroy. Gaslighting is one of the most poisonous forms of manipulation because it strikes at the core of your identity, your perception of reality. But once you understand the tactics, denial, distortion, rewriting, blame shifting, you can begin to recognize it. You can stop internalizing the lies and start trusting your inner compass again. At its heart, gaslighting reveals a powerful truth. Your perception, your emotions, and your memories are valid. They belong to you, not to anyone else. And the moment you reclaim trust in yourself, the manipulator's greatest weapon loses its power: time pressure. Time pressure is one of the most powerful psychological tactics used to influence decisions. At its core, it relies on urgency, forcing you to act quickly before you've had the chance to fully evaluate your options. When you're under time pressure, your brain shifts into survival mode. Instead of carefully analyzing choices, you default to instinct and shortcuts. And in those rushed moments, you're far more vulnerable to manipulation. Marketers know this well. Limited time offer, sale ends tonight, only 2 left in stock. These phrases are not just announcements, they're triggers. They push your brain into a state of scarcity and urgency. Instead of calmly asking, "Do I really need this?" you start worrying, "What if I miss out?" That fear of missing an opportunity, known as FOMO, can override logic and lead to impulsive decisions. You convince yourself to buy, commit, or agree because the clock is ticking, not because it's the best choice. But time pressure doesn't only exist in shopping, it shows up everywhere. In negotiations, salespeople often create artificial deadlines. "This deal is only good today," they'll say, pushing you to sign a contract before you can review the fine print. In workplaces, managers may assign unrealistic deadlines to force employees into compliance. The tighter the time frame, the less room there is to question whether the demand is fair. Even in personal relationships, manipulators use time pressure to control. "If you don't decide now, I'll assume you don't care." By manufacturing urgency, they corner you into reacting out of fear rather than making a thoughtful choice. The reason this works is because the human brain doesn't like uncertainty. Deadlines create a psychological squeeze. The mind wants resolution, even if it comes at the cost of poor judgment. Studies show that under time pressure, people tend to pick the on that feels easiest or most familiar, rather than the one that's objectively best. This is why advertisers pair time pressure with discounts or special deals. When your thinking is rushed, the easy option feels irresistible. The darker side of time pressure is that it can strip people of their ability to say no. High-pressure sales tactics are notorious for this. A customer is shown a product, pressured to act now, and left with little chance to reflect. Car dealerships, real estate agents, and investment scams all use this method. By denying you the luxury of time, they deny you the power of reason. Many victims of fraud later admit, "If I had just had more time to think, I never would have agreed." Time pressure can also be used to silence resistance. In arguments or negotiations, one person may say, "I need your answer right now." This doesn't allow space for the other person to think, gather their feelings, or seek advice. Instead, it corners them into making a rushed decision, often one that favors the manipulator. Over time, this erodes confidence and autonomy, because the victim begins to feel incapable of making clear decisions without being pressured. But time pressure doesn't only come from others. It often comes from within. Many people impose artificial deadlines on themselves, pushing themselves into stress and impulsivity. The internal voice that says, "I have to fix this immediately," or "I need to decide right now," often mirrors the same manipulation tactics used by others. This inner time pressure can lead to burnout, poor decision-making, and endless anxiety. So how do you defend against time pressure? The most powerful strategy is simple: create space. When someone says, "You need to decide right now," remember that urgency is often a tactic, not a truth. Pause. Say, "If I have to decide this second, the answer is no." This flips the pressure back. Key on to the manipulator. If the opportunity is genuine, it will still be there later. If it disappears, it was never meant for you in the first place. Another defense is to consciously slow down your decision-making process. Ask yourself, if there were no time limit, what choice would I make? This removes the false urgency and allows you to evaluate the situation based on logic, not fear. In professional settings, it helps to request written information or a follow-up meeting, anything that buys you time to think clearly. It's also important to become aware of how time pressure affects your body. Notice the tension in your chest, the rush of adrenaline, the sense of panic. These are signs that your brain has shifted into fight or flight mode. By taking even a few deep breaths, you signal to your nervous system that you are not in danger. This calms your mind and gives you back the power to think critically. When used ethically, time pressure can sometimes be motivating. Deadlines help us complete projects, move past procrastination, and stay disciplined. But the difference between healthy time pressure and manipulation lies in intent. A self-imposed deadline is meant to guide your growth. Manipulative time pressure is meant to strip away your freedom. At its heart, time pressure reminds us of a universal truth. Rushed decisions are rarely wise decisions. Whenever you feel the clock ticking and your mind panicking, pause and reclaim your right to choose on your own terms. Because if someone truly respects you, they'll respect your need for time. Anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is one of the most fascinating and deceptive cognitive shortcuts of the human mind. At its core, it refers to our tendency to rely too heavily on the very first piece of information we receive when making decisions. That initial number, idea, or reference point becomes an anchor that shapes all of our judgments afterward, even when it's irrelevant or misleading. Once the anchor is set, our minds cling to it, adjusting only slightly, instead of thinking freely and independently. Imagine walking into a store and seeing a jacket priced at $500. You think, that's expensive. A moment later, you see another jacket priced at $200. Suddenly, $200 feels like a bargain, even though $200 might still be far more than you normally spend. The $500 price was never about selling that jacket. It was about planting an anchor in your mind. This is how businesses, marketers, and negotiators exploit the anchoring bias every single day. Anchoring bias is everywhere in sales. Real estate agents show clients overpriced homes first, so the next house looks like a deal by comparison. Online stores mark items as 70% off, creating the illusion of massive savings, even if the discounted price is close to the real value. Restaurants strategically place extremely overpriced dishes on menus, not because they expect you to order them, but because the other options suddenly feel reasonable next to the anchor. Your brain believes it's making a smart choice, when in reality, it's simply being guided by the initial number presented. But this bias isn't limited to money. It shapes almost every decision we make. In negotiations, the person who speaks first and sets the anchor usually wins. If a car dealer starts with $30,000, even if you negotiate down to $25,000, your brain still feels like you got a good deal, even if the fair price was actually $20,000. Job applicants ace the same challenge when discussing salaries. If the employer sets a low anchor, candidates often feel pressured to negotiate around that figure instead of aiming higher. Anchoring quietly frames the entire discussion before it even begins. Anchoring bias also influences how we perceive ourselves and others. If someone introduces you to a person by saying, "They're extremely intelligent," you'll filter everything that follows through that lens. If they instead said, "They're not that sharp," your perception would shift dramatically, even if the person behaved the exact same way in both cases. That first piece of information anchors your impression, shaping judgments that may be entirely unfair. The media and politics also rely heavily on this bias. For example, when large numbers are repeated, like statistics about budgets, populations, or crimes, they anchor public perception. A politician may throw out an exaggerated number during a debate, knowing that even if it's corrected later, the anchor will stick in people's minds. Similarly, news headlines often set emotional anchors. If a story opens with fear, anger, or shock, everything that follows will feel amplified through that lens. The real danger of anchoring bias is that it creates the illusion of rationality. People believe they are making independent decisions, when in fact, they are adjusting only slightly from the anchor that was planted in their minds. Psychologists call this insufficient adjustment. Even when we know the anchor might be arbitrary, we still can't fully detach from it. It grips our thinking in ways we can't consciously control. On a personal level, anchoring bias can keep people trapped in negative beliefs. If someone grows up being told, "You're not good enough," that phrase becomes an anchor for their self-image. Every achievement, every compliment, every success gets filtered through that anchor. Instead of celebrating victories, they might think, "Maybe I just got lucky." The anchor holds them back, even when reality contradicts it. So, how do we defend against anchoring bias? The first step is awareness. Recognize that the first number, idea, or impression you encounter is not always the truth. It's often a tool meant to shape your judgment. Pause and ask, if I didn't hear that first piece of information, what would I think? By mentally resetting, you loosen the anchor's grip. The second step is to actively seek multiple perspectives. Instead of relying on the first price, statistic, or opinion you hear, look for alternatives. The more information you gather, the weaker the initial anchor becomes. In negotiations, it's often better to set your own anchor early by confidently naming your price, expectation, or value, rather than letting the other person define the terms. Anchoring bias also teaches us the power of framing. If you want to influence others, you can set the anchor yourself. Parents do this by setting high expectations for children, anchoring them to believe in greater possibilities. Leaders set anchors by framing goals ambitiously, pushing teams to rise to the challenge. Used ethically, anchoring can inspire growth instead of manipulation. At its heart, anchoring bias reveals how deeply our minds crave reference points. We don't float freely in decision-making. We look for something solid to hold on to, even if it's an illusion. By understanding this, you can protect yourself from unfair influence and use the principle responsibly to guide others toward better choices. The key is remembering that the first number or impression is not always reality. It's just an anchor. And anchors, while heavy, can always be lifted. False scarcity. False scarcity is one of the oldest and most effective tricks in the Book of Persuasion. It preys on a basic human instinct, the fear of missing out. When something appears rare or limited, our brain assigns it greater value, regardless of its actual worth. The thought that we may never get another chance at it pushes us to act impulsively, often against our better judgment. But when scarcity is manufactured, when it's not real, only created to manipulate behavior, it becomes one of the most deceptive forms of psychological influence. The principle behind false scarcity is rooted in survival. For thousands of years, scarcity meant danger. Food, water, shelter, and resources were limited, and failing to act quickly could mean death. Our ancestors survived by grabbing opportunities the moment they appeared. That instinct still lives inside us. When we see only 2 left in stock, or offer expires tonight, our survival wiring kicks in, urging us to act fast. The problem is that in today's world, most of these messages are carefully engineered illusions. Marketers and businesses have mastered the art of false scarcity. E-commerce websites flash countdown timers. Deal ends in 5 minutes. Hotels and airlines show messages like, "Only 1 room left at this price." These statements are often designed not to reflect reality, but to push you into urgency. The truth is, the deal might restart tomorrow, and there may be hundreds of rooms available. But the moment scarcity enters the equation, logic weakens and emotion takes control. Retail stores also exploit this tactic. Think about Black Friday sales, where crowds rush to grab limited items. In many cases, the products aren't rare at all. Companies deliberately restrict supply or advertise false limits to spark panic. The shelves may be restocked the next day, but by then, shoppers have already spent their money. In a frenzy of fear and excitement, this is false scarcity at work, a deliberate creation of urgency where none exists. False scarcity doesn't only show up in consumer behavior. It's also used in relationships and power dynamics. A manipulative partner might say, "You'll never find someone like me," creating the illusion that love itself is scarce. Employers may insist, Jobs like this don't come around often, pressuring employees to accept poor conditions. Even friendships can be manipulated through scarcity, with one person withholding time or attention to make the other feel desperate to keep the bond alive. In all of these cases, the illusion of rarity creates dependence and fear of loss. The darker side of false scarcity is that it often leads to regret. Decisions made under artificial urgency rarely align with long-term values. People overspend, commit to things they don't want, or enter unhealthy relationships simply because they feared missing out. Once the illusion fades, they realize the opportunity was never rare to begin with. It was simply framed that way. The manipulator, whether a business or an individual, benefits from the rushed choice while the victim is left with consequences. So how do you defend yourself against false scarcity? The key is to slow down. Whenever you see phrases like limited time or only one left, pause and ask, is this urgency real or is it being created? Often, if the opportunity is genuine, it will still be there tomorrow. If it disappears the moment you hesitate, chances are it was never worth it in the first place. Another powerful defense is to separate need from desire. Ask yourself, would I want this even if there were unlimited supply? If the answer is yes, then the choice may be valid. But if the only reason you feel pulled is because it might disappear, recognize that you're being manipulated. Scarcity should not be the sole driver of your decision. It should be the value of the thing itself. It's also helpful to look for patterns. If a website constantly shows only 2 left every time you visit, or if a person in your life always pressures you with last chances, recognize it as a tactic rather than truth. Once you see the game, its power weakens. Awareness is the antidote to manipulation. Of course, scarcity in itself isn't always negative. Real scarcity does exist. Unique opportunities, limited resources, one-of-a-kind experiences. In these cases, scarcity reflects reality, not deception. But false scarcity is about illusion. It's about convincing you that something is slipping away when in truth, it never was. The difference lies in intention. Real scarcity is factual. False scarcity is manipulative. At its heart, false scarcity teaches us an important lesson about control. The moment you let urgency dictate your choices, you give away your power. But when you pause, question, and evaluate with clarity, you reclaim it. You realize that the world is full of opportunities, not just the ones someone is pressuring you to grab. In the end, false scarcity thrives on fear. Fear of loss, fear of regret, fear of missing out. But once you see through the illusion, that fear dissolves. You don't have to chase every last chance. You don't have to grab what someone dangles in front of you just because they say it's rare. True power lies in making decisions on your own terms, not under the ticking clock of someone else's design. Framing manipulation is one of the most subtle yet powerful techniques of influence. At its core, it's not about changing the facts. It's about changing the way the facts are presented. The words, context, and perspective used to frame a situation can completely alter how people perceive it, even if the underlying information remains the same. The power of framing lies in its ability to shape emotions, decisions, and beliefs without ever needing to distort reality outright. Think of framing as the lens through which information is delivered. The lens itself may be clear, but the angle, lighting, and focus change what you see. For example, imagine a medical procedure with a 90% survival rate. That sounds reassuring. But describe the same procedure as having a 10% death rate, and suddenly it feels frightening. Both statements are mathematically identical, but the framing determines the emotional response. This is the essence of framing manipulation, guiding perception, not by changing reality, but by deciding how reality is described. Marketers rely heavily on framing to influence consumer behavior. Labels like fat-free, sugar-free, or 90 calories per serving highlight positive frames while downplaying negatives. A product that says 95% customer satisfaction sounds far more appealing than one that admits 5% dissatisfaction. Even the way prices are framed matters. Something listed at only $1 a day feels much cheaper than $365 per year, even though they are the same. By choosing the frame, marketers guide how consumers emotionally interpret value. Politics is another arena where framing manipulation thrives. Leaders and media outlets frame issues to sway public opinion. For example, calling a tax policy relief frames it as a burden being lifted, while calling it a cut frames it as money being taken away from vital services. The same policy, two frames, two entirely different emotional responses. Wars are framed as defending freedom rather than attacking another country. Surveillance programs are framed as security measures instead of loss of privacy. The battle is not always over truth itself, but over the way truth is presented. Framing also shapes interpersonal relationships. A manipulative partner might say, "I sacrifice so much for you," framing their contributions as burdens that demand repayment, instead of acts of love freely given. In families, parents may frame a child's independence as rebellion, making natural growth seem like disobedience. At work, a boss might frame unpaid overtime as team dedication rather than exploitation. These frames subtly alter how the victim perceives their own behavior, shifting guilt, responsibility, and control. The reason framing is so effective is that human beings rarely respond to facts in isolation. We respond to context. Our emotions, values, and biases filter raw information. When a message is framed skillfully, it bypasses rational analysis and taps directly into emotional interpretation. That's why two people can hear the same information framed differently and walk away with completely opposite beliefs about it. But framing manipulation has a darker, more insidious side. It can normalize injustice by dressing it in acceptable language. For example, mass layoffs might be framed as corporate restructuring. Civilian casualties in war might be framed as collateral damage. These terms soften harsh realities, distancing people from the emotional weight of the truth. Over time, constant exposure to such frames reshapes public perception, making the unacceptable seem tolerable. So, how do you defend yourself against framing manipulation? The first step is awareness. Pay attention to the language being used. Ask yourself, what is being emphasized? What is being left out? How else could this same fact be described? By reframing the information yourself, you strip away the manipulator's control and see the raw reality beneath the lens. The second step is to delay emotional reactions. If a headline or statement triggers immediate fear, anger, or excitement, pause before responding. Framing is designed to spark emotion first and reasoning later. By slowing down and questioning the message, you weaken its hold over you. The third step is to expose yourself to multiple perspectives. Different sources frame the same events in different ways. By comparing frames, you gain a more complete picture and protect yourself from being trapped in one version of reality. The more frames you see, the harder it is for any single one to control your perception. Framing can also be used positively. Parents might frame chores as teamwork rather than punishment, encouraging children to feel part of something bigger. Leaders might frame challenges as opportunities for growth instead of setbacks. Even self-talk benefits from framing. Instead of saying, "I failed," you might say, "I learned what doesn't work." The facts remain, but the frame empowers instead of discourages. At its heart, framing manipulation reveals a profound truth. Perception is malleable. What you believe about a situation often depends less on the situation itself and more on how it is presented to you. Once you recognize this, you gain freedom. You can step back, reframe the message, and choose the perspective that serves truth rather than manipulation. In the end, framing manipulation is not about lies. It's about angles. And when you learn to see beyond the angles, you stop being a passive recipient of someone else's story and start becoming the author of your own perspective.
Social proof exploitation. Social proof exploitation is one of the most widespread and powerful forms of psychological influence. It works by hijacking one of our strongest instincts, the desire to belong. Human beings are social creatures, wired to look to others for cues about how to act, what to believe, and what choices to make. When we see a crowd moving in one direction, we instinctively assume it must be the right direction. When we see others praising a product, a leader, or an idea, we are far more likely to trust it ourselves. This instinct keeps societies stable, but when it is exploited, it can strip away independent thought and turn people into followers without even realizing it. At its core, social proof means that people are more likely to do something if they see others doing it first. This effect is deeply rooted in survival. For our ancestors, following the group often meant safety. If everyone ran from a predator, you ran too, without pausing to analyze whether the danger was real. If the tribe ate a certain plant, you trusted it was safe. Group behavior was an essential shortcut for survival. The problem is that in the modern world, this shortcut is easy to manipulate. Marketers use social proof constantly. Think of product reviews, testimonials, and ratings. When you see a restaurant with hundreds of 5-star reviews, you feel confident choosing it over one with no reviews, even if you don't know any of the people who left the ratings. Sales pages display messages like, 1,000 customers bought this today, or join millions who already love this product. The message is clear. Other people approve, so you should too. Even limited time counters showing 37 people are viewing this item right now are designed to make you believe you're part of a crowd moving in the same direction. Social media has amplified this effect to an extreme level. So how do you defend yourself against this kind of manipulation? The first step is to pause whenever you feel swayed by popularity. Ask yourself, if no one else were doing this, would I still want it? If there were no likes, no reviews, no crowd, would I still choose this path? This question separates true desire from herd influence. The second step is to recognize manufactured social proof. Many reviews online are fake. Follower counts can be bought, crowds can be staged. Manipulators know that the appearance of approval is often enough to sway people, regardless of whether the approval is genuine. By questioning the authenticity of social proof, you weaken its grip. The third step is to strengthen your inner compass. The more confident you are in your own values, the less you need external validation. When you learn to stand firm even when you're the only one, social proof loses its power to control you. Independent thinking may feel lonely at times, but it is the foundation of true freedom. That being said, social proof itself is not always negative. It can guide us toward positive behaviors. Seeing others recycle encourages us to recycle. Watching people volunteer inspires us to give back. Social proof can normalize kindness, generosity, and growth. The difference lies in how it's used. When it encourages positive action, it's powerful. When it's exploited to strip away independent thought, it's manipulative. At its heart, social proof exploitation reveals a truth about human nature. We are influenced by others far more than we realize. But influence doesn't have to mean control. The moment you recognize the pattern, you gain the ability to step outside it. You can appreciate what others are doing without blindly copying it. You can listen to the crowd without losing your own voice. In the end, the greatest defense against social proof exploitation is simple. The cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is one of the most fascinating and uncomfortable psychological experiences we encounter as human beings. At its core, it describes the mental tension we feel when our beliefs, values, or actions don't align with one another. It's that inner conflict that whispers, something doesn't add up here. And because human beings crave consistency, we will do almost anything to reduce that tension, even if it means lying to ourselves, bending reality, or rationalizing choices that don't make sense. Imagine this: someone who prides themselves on being honest tells a lie to protect their reputation. Inside, they feel an uneasy clash. I'm honest versus I just lied. That uncomfortable clash is cognitive dissonance. Or consider a smoker who knows cigarettes are harmful, but keeps smoking anyway. To resolve the tension, they may tell themselves, it relaxes me, so it's worth it, or lots of people smoke and live long lives. Instead of changing their behavior, they change their justification. This is how dissonance works. It forces us to either align actions with beliefs or reshape beliefs to fit actions. Cognitive dissonance is everywhere in daily life. When someone stays in a toxic relationship, they may convince themselves, it's not that bad, or at least I'm not alone. When a person buys something expensive they don't need, they justify it by saying, I deserve to treat myself, or it was an investment. Even in politics, people support flawed leaders by downplaying the flaws and emphasizing justifications. No one's perfect, or the other side is worse. Dissonance pushes us to protect our self-image, even if it means twisting reality. The power of cognitive dissonance lies in how deeply it influences decisions and behavior. We like to think we're rational creatures, but often we're rationalizers, not rational, once we've committed. The dangerous part of dissonance is how unconscious it often is. People don't sit down and say, I will now justify my actions. Instead, the mind automatically creates excuses and stories to protect the ego. This makes it incredibly hard to spot in yourself, because by the time dissonance arises, the justifications feel natural. You don't see them as lies, you see them as truth. So how do you defend against the trap of cognitive dissonance? The first step is awareness. Pay attention to the stories you tell yourself when your actions and beliefs don't align. Ask, am I explaining this to make myself feel better, or is it really true? By catching rationalizations in the moment, you can start separating excuses from reality. The second step is to embrace discomfort. Dissonance feels painful, but that pain is a signal for growth. Instead of running from it, use it as a compass. If your values and actions don't match, maybe it's time to adjust your behavior rather than your beliefs. Growth often requires honesty with ourselves, even when it stings. The third step is to seek accountability. Trusted friends, mentors, or therapists can help point out rationalizations you may not see in yourself. When someone challenges your justifications, it can feel uncomfortable, but that discomfort is exactly what breaks the cycle of dissonance. Cognitive dissonance, when faced with awareness and courage, can be a powerful tool for change. It reveals where your life is out of alignment. Instead of letting it drive you deeper into self-deception, you can use it to push yourself toward integrity. Every time you choose honesty over justification, you weaken dissonance's hold. At its core, cognitive dissonance is a reminder of how much we want to see ourselves as consistent, good, and rational. But true strength doesn't come from maintaining illusions. It comes from confronting contradictions. Repetition, hypnosis. Repetition hypnosis is one of the oldest and most subtle methods of psychological influence. It works on a simple principle. The more often a message is repeated, the deeper it sinks into the subconscious mind. Over time, the message bypasses critical thinking and begins to feel like truth, not because of evidence or logic, but because of constant exposure. Repetition doesn't just inform us, it conditions us. It rewires our patterns of thought until we accept ideas automatically, without questioning where they came from. This technique has been used for centuries. Ancient rituals, prayers, and chants relied on repetition to bring people into trance-like states. The rhythmic nature of repeated words or sounds calms the conscious mind, making it easier to implant beliefs, values, or emotional responses. Religious practices, military drills, and even political propaganda have all used repetition to unite people under shared ideas and to ensure those ideas are remembered long after the words are spoken. Modern society is drenched in repetition hypnosis, though we rarely notice it. Advertisers repeat slogans until they become impossible to forget. Politicians repeat the same promises and catchphrases at every rally, knowing that constant exposure makes their words stick. News outlets repeat stories, framing the same narrative over and over, shaping how we interpret events. Even on social media, algorithms amplify repeated content, memes, hashtags, sound bites, until they become the dominant voice in our mental landscape. The brain is particularly vulnerable to repetition because of how memory works. Each time we hear or see something repeated, neural pathways strengthen, making the idea easier to recall. The brain confuses fluency, the ease with which we remember something, with truth. If it feels familiar, it feels true. This is why lies when repeated oft.
So, how do you defend against repetition hypnosis? The first step is awareness. Notice when messages are repeated over and over. Ask yourself, am I believing this because it's true or because I've heard it so many times? The second step is to diversify your inputs. Seek out different perspectives, new voices, and alternative information. Repetition loses power when it's not the only voice you hear. The third step is to consciously choose what you repeat to yourself. If repetition is inevitable, use it to your advantage. Create affirmations, mantras, or reminders that reflect the person you want to become. Repeat them until they feel natural. Just as harmful repetition can break you down, intentional repetition can build you up. Repetition hypnosis also teaches us the importance of mindfulness. When you become aware of repeated messages, whether in media, relationships, or your own thoughts, you step outside the trance. You regain the ability to choose what enters your subconscious. You no longer accept ideas simply because they're familiar. You test them against truth. At its heart, repetition hypnosis is neither good nor bad. It is a tool. Like fire, it can warm or destroy. It can create empowerment or enslavement. The difference lies in intention and awareness. If you allow others to control the messages repeated in your life, they control your mind. But if you consciously choose what to repeat, you reclaim that power. In the end, repetition hypnosis reveals a powerful truth. The words and ideas you allow into your life will shape who you become. Whether they come from others or from within, repetition writes the script of your reality. The question is, who is holding the pen? Priming. Priming is one of the most subtle yet powerful psychological effects that shape our behavior without us even realizing it. At its core, priming occurs when exposure to one stimulus influences how we respond to another. In simpler terms, what you see, hear, or experience beforehand quietly sets the stage for your next thoughts, feelings, or actions. It's like someone planting a seed in your mind that later grows into behavior, often without your conscious awareness. The human brain thrives on associations. Every word, image, or memory we encounter links to countless others stored in our subconscious. Priming taps into these connections. For example, if you read the word yellow, you are more likely to think of banana than moon. That's priming in action, the mind linking one idea to another automatically. But in real life, priming goes far beyond word games. It influences decisions, judgments, and even how we see ourselves. Marketers and advertisers use priming constantly. A commercial showing happy families enjoying a certain soda primes you to associate that drink with joy and belonging. Supermarkets place upbeat music in certain aisles to prime you for longer shopping and positive moods. Even colors are used strategically. Red is often linked with urgency and excitement, while blue primes calmness and trust. Without saying a word, these subtle cues shape how you behave, what you buy, and how you feel in the moment. But priming isn't just about shopping. It also affects relationships and social behavior. For instance, research shows that when people are exposed to words related to kindness or cooperation, they're more likely to behave generously in the minutes that follow. On the flip side, if they're primed with words connected to aggression or hostility, they're more likely to act impatiently or rudely. A simple image, phrase, or tone can set the emotional atmosphere of an interaction long before the first word is spoken. Priming also shows up in education and performance. A student reminded of their strengths before a test is likely to perform better, while one reminded of stereotypes about their group may unconsciously underperform. Athletes use priming deliberately by visualizing success before a game, conditioning their mind to step into the performance with confidence. Priming works because the brain prepares itself to align with whatever associations are most active in the subconscious. The darker side of priming lies in its ability to manipulate without detection. Politicians know that the language they use primes public opinion. For example, describing taxes as a burden primes people to resent them, while describing them as investments primes people to see them as contributions to growth. News headlines that emphasize fear or danger prime audiences to see the world as more threatening than it may truly be. Over time, these subtle frames shape beliefs and behaviors on a massive scale. Even personal relationships can involve manipulative priming. A toxic partner might constantly bring up your past mistakes, priming you to feel guilty and submissive in present arguments. A boss may prime employees with reminders of how competitive the job market is, creating fear and compliance. In these cases, priming isn't just a passive influence, it's an intentional tactic to condition behavior. So, how do you defend against unwanted priming? The first step is awareness. Begin noticing the subtle cues around you, music, colors, phrases, or even repeated words. Ask yourself, is this shaping how I feel right now? The moment you recognize priming, you weaken its invisible hold. The second step is conscious repriming. If you notice yourself being influenced negatively, deliberately expose yourself to positive cues. Listen to music that uplifts you. Read affirmations that empower you. Surround yourself with images and words that reflect the mindset you want to have. Just as harmful priming can pull you down, intentional priming can lift you up. It's also important to recognize your own patterns of self-priming. The thoughts you repeat to yourself every morning are seeds you plant in your subconscious. If you start your day with worry and negativity, you prime yourself for stress. But if you start your day with gratitude and focus, you prime yourself for confidence and clarity. What you feed your mind becomes the stage on which your day unfolds. Priming itself is not inherently good or bad. It's simply how the human mind works. The danger lies in letting others control your primes without realizing it. The power lies in taking charge of the cues you allow into your life. When used consciously, priming can help you break habits, boost performance, and reshape your mindset. When left unchecked, it can make you a puppet to subtle influences. At its heart, priming reveals a powerful truth. We are constantly being prepared for what comes next, often without knowing it. Every word, image, and experience is a doorway to behavior. Once you understand this, you can step back, take control of your environment, and deliberately choose the primes that lead you toward the life you want. Overloading with information. Overloading with information, often called information overload, is a psychological tactic that overwhelms the mind by flooding it with excessive data, details, or arguments. The purpose isn't clarity, it's confusion. When someone is bombarded with more information than they can reasonably process, their brain becomes fatigued. Decision-making slows down, focus shatters, and instead of analyzing carefully, people either give up or fall back on the easiest choice presented to them. Manipulators know this, and they use it to their advantage. The human brain is powerful, but it has limits. We can only hold a certain amount of information in working memory at once. When too many details are crammed in, the brain reaches a point of overload, and cognitive function drops. Instead of feeling more informed, we actually feel paralyzed. This is why long contracts, complicated terms and conditions, or endless fine print are effective tools of manipulation. People stop reading, stop analyzing, and simply sign on the dotted line. Marketers use information overload in subtle ways. When they present endless product features, comparison charts, or exaggerated claims, the customer feels overwhelmed. Instead of carefully weighing options, the overwhelmed mind seeks relief by choosing the highlighted or recommended option the seller wanted all along. Too many choices don't empower customers, they trap them. That's why streaming services, restaurants, and shops often present overwhelming menus, but also highlight a most popular choice. Overload drives people to the simplest path. Politicians and leaders also use this strategy. Instead of giving clear answers, they bury the truth under endless statistics, half-truths, and irrelevant facts. The sheer volume of words creates the illusion of authority, but the real purpose is to exhaust the listener. When overwhelmed, people are less likely to challenge information or question inconsistencies. They nod along, not because they agree, but because they're too mentally tired to resist. Even in personal relationships, overloading with information can be manipulative. A toxic partner might bring up a flood of past arguments, mistakes, and details during a fight. They stack one issue on top of another until their partner is too drained to respond. In workplaces, a manipulative boss may bury employees under endless instructions, emails, and shifting priorities so that mistakes are inevitable, then use those mistakes to blame or control them. Information overload creates chaos, and in chaos, the manipulator maintains control. The danger of this tactic is that it hides the truth in plain sight. Important details are drowned in noise, making them harder to notice. Victims often walk away agreeing to things they don't fully understand, simply because they couldn't process everything thrown at them. Over time, this creates patterns of dependence. People begin to rely on the manipulator to explain or simplify the chaos, not realizing the chaos was deliberately manufactured. So how do you defend against information overload? The first step is to slow down. Overload works by rushing you into quick decisions before you have time to think. Whenever you feel bombarded with excessive data, step back. Ask yourself, what actually matters here? What's the core decision I need to make? Filtering out noise is the key to clarity. The second step is to simplify for yourself. Break information into smaller pieces and process one step at a time. If you're handed a long contract, focus on the key terms first. If a debate floods you with endless statistics, ask for the source of one claim instead of trying to refute everything. By narrowing focus, you regain control over the conversation. The third step is to recognize the emotional signs of overload. Confusion, frustration, fatigue, and the urge to just get it over with are red flags. These emotions signal that your brain has reached its limit. Instead of giving in, see them as reminders to pause. No one makes good decisions in a state of mental exhaustion. It's also important to create your own boundaries. If someone insists on flooding you with endless details in a manipulative way, respond by saying, "This is too much information at once. Let's focus on one issue at a time." This disarms the tactic because it removes the manipulator's ability to control the flow of information. Overloading with information doesn't always have to be harmful. In some contexts, providing lots of details can help people learn or explore. The difference lies in intention. When overload is used to empower people, the information is structured, organized, and clear. When it's used to manipulate, the information is chaotic, overwhelming, and disorienting. One creates knowledge, the other creates confusion. At its heart, overloading with information reveals how vulnerable the mind is when faced with too much at once. Information is only power when it is clear and digestible. When it's excessive and chaotic, it becomes a weapon. The key is remembering that you have the right to slow down, to filter, and to decide on your own terms. In the end, information overload is not about truth. It's about control. And once you learn to recognize it, you can step out of the fog, cut through the noise, and reclaim your ability to think clearly. Ben Franklin Effect. The Ben Franklin Effect is one of the most fascinating quirks of human psychology. It suggests that when someone does a favor for you, they are actually more likely to like you afterward, not less. At first, this sounds strange. Logic tells us that if you do something kind for another person, you should feel warmer toward them. But the Ben Franklin Effect flips that idea. Instead, when we help someone, our mind works backward to justify our action. If I did them a favor, it must be because I like them. The name comes from the American statesman and inventor Benjamin Franklin. He once had an opponent in politics who disliked him. Instead of trying to win him over with flattery or favors, Franklin asked to borrow a rare book from him. The man agreed, and when Franklin returned the book with thanks, a curious thing happened. The opponent became friendly. Franklin had discovered a psychological trick. By asking someone to invest in you, they often begin to rationalize their action by believing they must value you. This effect is rooted in the human need for consistency. We like our actions and beliefs to align. If we do something kind for someone we claim to dislike, our mind experiences cognitive dissonance. Why did I help them if I don't like them? To resolve this inner conflict, we often adjust our attitude, convincing ourselves that we do like the person after all. In this way, our behavior shapes our beliefs, not the other way around. The Ben Franklin effect shows up in everyday life more than we realize. Think about friendships. Sometimes people feel closer after being asked for help than after receiving help themselves. A small request, borrowing notes, giving advice, or lending a hand creates a bond because the helper begins to see themselves as caring and supportive toward the other. Over time, these small investments build trust and attachment. Marketers and salespeople use this effect strategically. They ask for small commitments first. Can you answer a quick survey? Or, would you like to try a free sample? Once you agree, you feel subtly more positive toward the brand. This is because your brain thinks, if I gave them my time, it must mean I trust them. From there, it becomes easier to agree to larger requests, like making a purchase or joining a subscription. The initial favor primes the relationship. In relationships, the Ben Franklin effect can be used both positively and negatively. On the positive side, asking for small favors can deepen bonds, create mutual dependence, and build a sense of partnership. But in toxic dynamics, manipulators exploit this by constantly asking for small things, favors, sacrifices, forgiveness. Each time the victim agrees, they feel more invested in the relationship, making it harder to walk away. Over time, the victim convinces themselves they must care deeply, because why else would they keep giving? This effect also explains why people often defend choices they've already invested in. If you've helped someone multiple times, you may feel compelled to believe they deserve your support, even if they treat you poorly. Otherwise, you'd have to face the uncomfortable truth that your kindness was wasted. By rationalizing, I must like them, you protect your sense of consistency, even at your own expense. So, how can you use the Ben Franklin effect in your own life? First, recognize that asking for help is not weakness. It's a psychological bridge. By giving others the opportunity to support you, you strengthen bonds. The key is to start small. A simple request makes people feel trusted and valued, and their willingness to help increases their sense of connection to you. Second, be mindful of when others may be exploiting this effect against you. If someone constantly demands small favors but rarely reciprocates, they may be using psychology to keep you invested. Ask yourself, do I genuinely want to help, or am I being conditioned to believe I care more than I actually do? Awareness protects you from being manipulated. The Ben Franklin effect also offers insight into self-growth. When you take action towards something, helping someone, committing to a project, supporting a cause, you begin to align your identity with that behavior. In other words, the actions you take can shape who you believe yourself to be. By deliberately engaging in small acts of kindness or discipline, you can condition your mind to see yourself as a kinder, stronger, more consistent person. At its heart, the Ben Franklin effect reminds us that people aren't just logical, they are storytellers. They tell themselves stories to explain why they acted a certain way. And once they tell that story, I help them because I like them, it becomes part of their reality. Understanding this can help you build stronger connections, resist manipulation, and even reshape your own self-image. In the end, the Ben Franklin effect is about how behavior influences belief. By recognizing it, you learn that every small action, whether done for or by someone, creates ripples in how we perceive relationships. The question is, are those ripples shaping connections that empower you, or trapping you in bonds that drain you? The Pygmalion effect. The Pygmalion effect is a powerful psychological phenomenon that reveals how deeply our expectations influence the behavior of others. At its core, it suggests that people tend to rise, or fall, to the level of expectations placed upon them. When someone believes in us, encourages us, and expects us to succeed, we are far more likely to meet those expectations. Conversely, when people doubt us, dismiss us, or expect us to fail, we may unconsciously live down to those lowered standards. In both directions, the beliefs of others shape reality. The term comes from the ancient Greek myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor who created a statue so beautiful that he fell in love with it. The gods brought the statue to life, making his belief in its beauty a reality. In psychology, this effect describes the same process. Expectations can breathe life into potential. What others believe about you doesn't just stay in their mind. It seeps into your own behavior, guiding your self-image and actions. One of the most famous studies on this effect took place in education. Researchers told teachers that certain students in their class had been identified as intellectual bloomers who were expected to show rapid academic growth. In reality, these students were chosen at random. Yet, by the end of the year, the bloomers performed significantly better than their peers. Why? Because the teachers' expectations changed how they treated those students. They gave them more attention, encouragement, and opportunities. The children, sensing this belief, rose to meet it. This effect isn't limited to classrooms. It shows up in workplaces, families, friendships, and relationships. A leader who believes their team is capable inspires them to take initiative, think creatively, and perform at higher levels. A parent who tells their child, "I know you can do this," plants confidence that can shape the child's entire self-concept. Even in personal relationships, when one partner expresses faith in the other's potential, it often brings out the very qualities they believe in. But the Pygmalion effect has a darker side too. Just as positive expectations can lift people up, negative expectations can drag them down. This is sometimes called the golem effect. If a teacher believes a student is lazy or unintelligent, they may unconsciously treat that student with less patience or attention. Over time, the student may begin to believe those low expectations, performing worse than they otherwise could. The cycle reinforces itself. The teacher says, "See, I knew they couldn't do it," not realizing their expectations played a role in shaping that outcome. In workplaces, bosses who expect little from employees often create disengaged, underperforming teams. In relationships, a partner who constantly doubts you, saying things like, "You'll never change," or "You're not capable of that," may condition you to believe those limits. This is the dangerous side of the Pygmalion effect, when someone else's disbelief becomes your inner voice. What makes the Pygmalion effect so powerful is that it often works invisibly. Expectations aren't always spoken aloud. They're conveyed in subtle cues: tone of voice, body language, the amount of patience or opportunity given. People pick up on these signals, often unconsciously, and adjust their behavior accordingly. Encouragement feels like fuel. Doubt feels like poison. So how do you harness the positive side of this effect?
First, set high but realistic expectations for yourself and others. Believe that growth is possible. When you expect the best in people, you naturally interact with them in ways that bring out their strengths. Second, be intentional with your words. The things you repeatedly say, whether you can do this or you'll never succeed, become seeds planted in the subconscious. Those seeds grow into beliefs and behaviors over time. Third, pay attention to whose expectations you allow into your life. If you surround yourself with people who constantly doubt or belittle you, their low expectations can become a cage. But if you spend time with those who believe in your potential, their faith can serve as wings. Choosing your environment is one of the most powerful ways to shape your own reality. The Pygmalion Effect also offers a reminder about leadership. True leaders are not those who control or intimidate, but those who expect greatness and nurture it in others. A leader's faith becomes contagious. When they look at someone and say, "I believe in you," it can ignite potential the person didn't even know they had. At its heart, the Pygmalion Effect is a mirror. The way others see you often reflects back into the way you see yourself, and the way you see others often becomes the stage on which they perform. Expectations are not just opinions, they are forces that shape reality. In the end, the Pygmalion Effect teaches us that belief is not passive, it's active. When you believe in someone, you help them rise. When you doubt them, you weigh them down. The choice is always yours. Will your expectations be a prison, or will they be wings? Negative reinforcement is one of the most misunderstood psychological concepts. Many people confuse it with punishment, but they are not the same. Punishment is about adding pain or removing pleasure to stop a behavior. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, is about encouraging a behavior by taking away something unpleasant. It doesn't discourage action, it strengthens it. The mind learns, if I do this, the discomfort will go away. Imagine a parent nagging their child to clean their room. The child cleans, not because they enjoy it, but because cleaning removes the nagging. The relief from the annoyance reinforces the behavior. In the future, the child is more likely to clean quickly, not out of discipline, but out of a desire to escape the negative pressure. The removal of the unpleasant experience becomes the reward. This mechanism shows up everywhere. Students may study hard, not because they love learning, but to avoid the stress of failing. Employees may meet deadlines to escape the boss's criticism. Drivers may obey speed limits, not because they value safety, but to avoid tickets. Negative reinforcement shapes behavior by tying action to relief, and relief can be just as powerful a motivator as reward. Manipulators understand this dynamic well. A toxic partner may give the silent treatment until you apologize, even if you did nothing wrong. Your apology removes the tension, so you become conditioned to give in quickly to avoid conflict. Over time, this reinforcement traps you in a cycle of compliance. The abuser doesn't need to punish you directly. They just withhold comfort until you surrender. Negative reinforcement also thrives in workplaces. A manager may overload employees with pressure, but suddenly relax once tasks are completed. That moment of relief conditions employees to constantly overwork themselves. The stress disappears. False flattery. False flattery is one of the most manipulative tools in the psychology of influence. At its surface, it looks like kindness, compliments, admiration, and praise. But beneath that surface lies an ulterior motive. False flattery is not about appreciating you for who you are, it's about disarming you, lowering your guard, and making you more pliable to someone else's agenda. When words of praise are genuine, they inspire confidence and connection. But when they are false, they are nothing more than bait on a hook. Humans crave recognition. From childhood, we are conditioned to seek approval from parents, teachers, and peers. A kind word, a pat on the back, or a compliment fuels our sense of worth. Manipulators know this, and they weaponize it. They understand that when people hear positive words, their defenses soften. Compliments make us feel seen, valued, and understood. That moment of warmth is the very doorway through which influence enters. Think of a salesperson who says, "You seem like such a smart shopper. I can tell you know quality when you see it." The compliment has nothing to do with reality. It's designed to make you feel respected, so you're more likely to buy. Or consider a manipulative colleague who constantly praises your work. Not because they admire it, but because they want you to cover their shift later. In both cases, the praise is bait. The flattery isn't about you. It's about what they want from you. False flattery also thrives in relationships. A toxic partner may use compliments as tools of control. They may shower you with exaggerated praise when they want something, affection, forgiveness, or compliance. But the moment you stop giving them what they want, the flattery disappears, replaced by criticism or silence. This creates an emotional roller coaster. You start chasing their compliments, working harder to please them, even though defending yourself against false flattery requires self-awareness. When you hear praise, pause and ask, does this feel real? Do their actions support their words, or is there a hidden motive behind what they're saying? By filtering praise through critical thinking, you avoid being seduced by empty words. But there's also a deeper lesson here. The more secure you are in your own worth, the less you need external validation. False flattery loses its power when you already know who you are. If you believe in your own value, compliments become pleasant but not necessary. And when someone tries to manipulate you with empty words, you can recognize it instantly and refuse to play along. That doesn't mean we should reject all praise. Genuine admiration is one of the most beautiful forms of human connection, but we must learn to separate it from manipulation. True praise uplifts without expectation. False flattery always has strings attached. The key is to notice those strings before they tighten around you. At its heart, false flattery is about control through validation. It's the counterfeit currency of human connection, appearing valuable, but worthless in truth. Once you see through the illusion, you'll understand that not all kind words are kind. Some are weapons dressed as gifts. And when you learn to tell the difference, you'll stop chasing empty praise and start seeking only the authenticity that truly empowers you. The contrast principle. The contrast principle is one of the most subtle yet powerful psychological tricks used to shape human perception. It works by showing you two things back to back so that the second one seems better or worse depending on what came before. Instead of evaluating something on its own merits, your mind compares it to what it has just seen, and the difference between the two becomes the deciding factor. In other words, it's not about the thing itself, it's about what it's placed next to. Imagine you walk into a store and see a jacket priced at $600. That number shocks you. Then you see another jacket priced at $200. Suddenly, $200 feels like a bargain, even though objectively it may still be overpriced. The first jacket wasn't there to be sold. It was there to set an anchor, to create a contrast that makes the second jacket feel appealing. This is the essence of the contrast principle. Perception is relative, not absolute. Marketers and salespeople use this tactic constantly. Real estate agents first show potential buyers a rundown, overpriced home. Then, when they show a slightly better property at a lower price, it suddenly seems like a dream deal. Car dealerships push luxury models before showing the mid-range options, so the mid-range feels affordable by comparison. Restaurants place extremely expensive items at the top of their menus, not because they expect people to order them, but because everything else looks reasonable next to them. By manipulating contrast, they don't just influence what you buy, they shape how you feel about the purchase itself. But the contrast principle isn't limited to money. It influences how we view people, relationships, and even life itself. If you meet someone right after spending time with a rude or cold individual, their kindness will feel even warmer. If you meet someone after being around a charismatic config. So how do you defend against it? The first step is awareness. When faced with a choice, pause and ask, am I evaluating this on its own merits, or am I being swayed by what it's being compared to? If you strip away the contrast and look at the thing in isolation, the illusion often disappears. The second step is to slow down decisions. Manipulators want you to react quickly while the contrast is fresh in your mind. By giving yourself time, you allow the emotional impact of the comparison to fade. What felt like a bargain in the heat of the moment may feel overpriced after a night of reflection. The third step is to strengthen your inner reference points. Instead of relying on external comparisons, decide in advance what something is worth to you. If you know your budget for a jacket is $100, it doesn't matter if the $200 jacket is placed next to a $600 one. It's still outside your limit. When your standards are clear, contrast loses its power. The contrast principle itself is not inherently negative. It can be used to inspire, motivate, or bring perspective. For example, reminding yourself of how far you've come in life by comparing your present to your past can give you strength. Contrasting a bad habit with a healthier alternative can push you toward growth. The principle becomes harmful only when others deliberately use it to distort your judgment. At its core, the contrast principle teaches us a vital truth. perception is rarely absolute. The way we see value, beauty, fairness, or truth often depends on what it's placed beside. Once you recognize this, you no longer fall blindly for illusions. You begin to evaluate things not for how they look in comparison, but for what they truly are. In the end, the contrast principle is about power over perspective. If you let others control the frame of comparison, they control your choices. But if you step back, strip away. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful and addictive psychological patterns ever studied. It refers to rewarding behavior not every time it occurs, but only occasionally, in unpredictable ways. Instead of consistent rewards, the reinforcement comes in random intervals, creating uncertainty. And this uncertainty is what makes it so addictive. The brain becomes hooked, constantly chasing the possibility of the next reward, never knowing when it will arrive. To understand this, think about slot machines in casinos. They don't pay out every time you pull the lever. Most of the time you lose, but every once in a while you win just enough to keep you playing. The randomness of the reward creates excitement, tension, and hope. Psychologists discovered that people respond more strongly to unpredictable rewards than to predictable ones. This is why gambling is so addictive, not because of the size of the prize, but because of the unpredictability of when it will come. But casinos are not the only ones using this principle. Social media is built on intermittent reinforcement. Every time you post something, you don't know how many likes, comments, or shares you'll get. Sometimes the feedback is overwhelming, sometimes it's barely there. That unpredictability keeps people coming back, scrolling endlessly, refreshing feeds in search of the next little dopamine hit. Each notification becomes like a tiny slot machine win, keeping the user hooked. In relationships, intermittent reinforcement is one of the most dangerous manipulation tactics. A toxic partner might alternate between affection and neglect, kindness and cruelty. One day they shower you with love and attention, making you feel valued. The next day they withdraw completely or criticize harshly. This inconsistency creates emotional addiction. You begin to cling to the relationship. How can you defend yourself against it? The first step is awareness. Recognize when you're stuck in a cycle of unpredictability, when you're chasing approval, affection, or rewards that come inconsistently. Ask yourself, am I staying here because this situation truly fulfills me, or because I'm addicted to the occasional highs? The second step is to set clear standards for what you deserve. In relationships, don't settle for occasional kindness. Demand consistency. In workplaces, don't allow yourself to be strung along by random recognition. Look for environments where your value is acknowledged regularly. In your personal habits, be mindful of technologies and games designed to exploit this cycle. The third step is to break the cycle deliberately. Addiction to intermittent rewards thrives on passivity, on waiting for the next hit. By stepping away, by creating distance, you weaken the pull of the pattern. This may feel uncomfortable at first because your brain craves that next reward. But over time, the craving fades and clarity returns. Intermittent reinforcement can also be used positively, but only when applied with care. For example, in training animals or children, occasional rewards can keep motivation alive without creating dependence. But the difference between healthy use and manipulation lies in transparency and intent. If unpredictability is used to control, it becomes toxic. If it's used to encourage growth, it can be a tool. At its heart, intermittent reinforcement reveals a sobering truth. People don't just crave rewards, they crave the possibility of rewards. And that possibility, when left unpredictable, can become a chain stronger than steel. Once you see the pattern, however, you gain the power to break free. In the end, intermittent reinforcement is not about the reward itself. It's about the cycle. The question is, are you living freely or are you... Fear then relief trick. The fear then relief trick is one of the most manipulative psychological techniques ever used to control behavior. It relies on creating a sudden surge of fear, panic, or anxiety in a person, and then quickly removing that fear to replace it with relief. The emotional swing from terror to comfort is so powerful that it leaves the victim vulnerable, disoriented, and more likely to comply with requests or demands. In that brief moment of relief, the mind stops questioning and becomes easier to influence. This method works because of how human biology is wired. When we feel fear, the body activates the fight or flight response. Our heart races, adrenaline floods the bloodstream, and survival instincts take over. It's an intense state of hyper-alertness, But when the fear is suddenly lifted, the body relaxes, creating a sharp contrast. That wave of relief feels intoxicating, almost like a drug. In that vulnerable moment, people are less likely to resist suggestions because their mind is still recovering from the emotional roller coaster. One classic example is a police officer pulling someone over and starting with a harsh tone. "Do you realize how fast you were going? This could cost you your license." The driver panics, imagining fines, penalties, or even jail. Then the officer says, "I'll let you off with just a warning." The fear melts into relief, and the driver is left feeling grateful, even though they were just threatened. This is the fear-then-relief trick in action, turning fear into obedience and even false gratitude. Marketers also use this tactic in subtle ways. An advertisement might first scare you with dramatic warnings. "Your home may not be safe from burglars," or "This illness could strike at any time." The fear builds. Then they present their product as the solution, but with our security system or with our supplement, you're... So how do you defend yourself against the fear-then-relief trick? The first step is recognition. If you notice someone deliberately scaring you and then immediately offering comfort, pause. Ask yourself, did they create the fear in the first place just to sell me the relief? If the answer is yes, you're likely being manipulated. The second step is to separate the fear from the solution. Just because someone presents both doesn't mean they're connected. A product, relationship, or authority figure may position themselves as your savior, but if they also created the fear, their solution is not genuine. It's part of the trap. The third step is to stay grounded during emotional swings. When fear strikes, focus on calming your body, slow breaths, grounding your thoughts, refusing to make snap decisions. Relief may feel intoxicating, but don't let it cloud your judgment. Real relief doesn't come from manipulation. It comes from clarity. The fear-then-relief trick is not inherently evil. It can even be seen in harmless forms, like pranks or surprise parties, where fear is followed by laughter and joy. But when used deliberately to manipulate, it becomes toxic. It exploits vulnerability at the deepest level, turning human emotions into levers of control. At its core, this trick teaches us how powerful emotional contrast is. Fear creates desperation, and relief creates gratitude. When combined, they form one of the strongest tools of influence ever known. But once you recognize the pattern, you no longer have to ride that roller coaster. You can step off, stand firm, and make decisions free from the emotional trap. In the end, the fear-then-relief trick is about control through chaos. Manipulators create storms just so they can sell you the calm afterward. True strength lies in realizing you don't need their version of safety. You can create your own peace without being pushed into fear first. Reverse psychology. Reverse psychology is one of the most intriguing and paradoxical techniques of influence. At its core, it involves telling someone to do the opposite of what you actually want them to do, knowing that their instinctive resistance to being controlled will push them toward the choice you desire. It's a strategy that takes advantage of human stubbornness, pride, and the deep need for autonomy. We don't like being told what to do, so when someone frames a suggestion in reverse, we often rebel right into their hands. Think about a child who refuses to eat their vegetables. A parent might say, "Fine, don't eat them. You probably won't like them anyway." Suddenly, the child is curious and wants to prove the parent wrong. The very act of resisting authority makes the child choose the option the parent secretly wanted. This is reverse psychology in its simplest form, planting an idea by appearing to reject it. Marketers use this trick constantly. Ads say things like, "This product isn't for everyone," or "Most people won't understand the value of this." The implication is clear. Are you one of the few who gets it? People eager to prove they are unique or intelligent buy into the message. Scarcity and exclusivity, when framed in reverse, trigger desire. By challenging the audience's independence, the manipulator makes compliance feel like rebellion. In relationships, reverse psychology can be subtle and dangerous. A toxic partner might say, "You're probably too weak to handle life without me." The implication triggers pride and defiance, so the victim works harder to prove themselves, often by staying in the relationship and seeking approval. Or, a manipulator may pretend they don't care if you leave, knowing the false indifference will make you chase after them even harder. What looks like emotional detachment is really a calculated strategy to provoke pursuit. So how do you defend yourself against reverse psychology? The first step is to recognize your own patterns of reactance. Notice when you feel the urge to do something just because someone implied you couldn't. Ask yourself, am I acting from my own choice, or am I just reacting to prove them wrong? That pause can prevent you from falling into the trap. The second step is to look past the words and into the motives. If someone tells you not to do something but seems oddly invested in whether you do, they may be using reverse psychology. The key is to judge based on patterns, not just individual statements. Finally, strengthen your sense of autonomy. When you are confident in your decisions, you don't need to rebel against suggestions or prove yourself to anyone. You can listen, evaluate, and choose calmly. Reverse psychology thrives on emotional triggers: pride, defiance, insecurity. When you rise above those triggers, the strategy loses its grip. Of course, reverse psychology isn't always harmful. Parents may use it playfully to encourage kids. Teachers may use it to spark curiosity. Even in self-improvement, we sometimes use it on ourselves, telling ourselves we can't do something, just to provoke the defiant voice that says, "Watch me." In these cases, the trick can push people toward growth. The difference lies in whether it's used transparently or manipulatively. At its heart, reverse psychology reveals the paradox of human behavior. Sometimes the best way to make someone do something is to tell them not to. It exposes the deep truth that people crave freedom more than anything, and when that freedom feels threatened, they'll fight to reclaim it, even if it means doing exactly what someone else wanted all along. In the end, reverse psychology is a reminder to pause before reacting, because not every rebellion is true freedom, and not every act of defiance is authentic choice. Sometimes, the strongest act of independence is refusing to be manipulated at all. Planned vulnerability. Planned vulnerability is one of the most deceptive techniques of manipulation because it disguises itself as honesty and openness. At first glance, vulnerability seems like a sign of trust, intimacy, and authenticity. When someone shares their struggles or weaknesses with us, we instinctively feel closer to them. We lower our guard, we empathize, and we open up in return. But when vulnerability is planned, when it's staged, exaggerated, or strategically timed, it becomes a weapon, not a gift. It stops being about connection and starts being about control. This tactic works because human beings are wired to respond to vulnerability with compassion. If a person admits, "I'm going through something difficult," most of us lean in. We want to comfort, to help, to show support. Manipulators know this and exploit it by carefully choosing when and how to present their weakness. It's not spontaneous. It's calculated. They reveal just enough to tug at your emotions, while keeping the real intention hidden, gaining sympathy, lowering your defenses, or making you feel guilty for holding them accountable. Consider a manipulative partner who avoids responsibility by using planned vulnerability. After treating you poorly, they suddenly confess, "I just have so many insecurities," or "You don't know how hard life has been for me." Their confession makes you hesitate to confront them. Instead of focusing on their bad behavior, you start focusing on their pain. You forgive, you excuse, and you comfort, while they escape accountability. In this way, planned vulnerability turns weakness into a shield against consequences. The same tactic appears in workplaces. A boss might say, "I'm under so much pressure, you don't know what it's like," right after dumping unreasonable demands on employees. By framing themselves as overwhelmed and fragile, they flip the power dyna. The third step is to maintain boundaries. Compassion doesn't mean sacrificing clarity. You can care for someone's struggles while still holding them accountable for their actions. Planned vulnerability thrives on making you feel guilty for asserting your needs. But real empathy includes honesty. It doesn't demand silence or self-abandonment. Planned vulnerability is not always malicious. Sometimes people use it unconsciously, having learned that showing weakness gets them attention, support, or forgiveness. But whether intentional or not, the effect is the same. It shifts responsibility and creates imbalance in relationships. Awareness is the first step to breaking free from its grip. At its heart, planned vulnerability reminds us of the power of emotions. When used authentically, vulnerability builds bonds of trust and intimacy. But when staged, it becomes one of the most subtle and effective forms of manipulation. The challenge is to discern the difference, to see whether someone's openness is an invitation to mutual trust or a calculated move to control the narrative. In the end, true vulnerability is not a performance. It doesn't manipulate, it doesn't demand, it simply shares. The moment you learn to tell the difference, You reclaim the ability to connect deeply without being controlled. You learn that compassion and clarity can coexist, and most importantly, you learn that your empathy is a gift, one that should never be exploited as a tool against you. Guilt-seeding. Guilt-seeding is one of the most insidious and corrosive forms of psychological manipulation. At its core, it involves planting small, subtle suggestions that make you feel guilty, often for things you haven't done wrong or for responsibilities that aren't yours to carry. The manipulator sprinkles tiny seeds of guilt into conversations and interactions, knowing that over time, those seeds will take root in your subconscious. Before long, you find yourself apologizing, justifying, or sacrificing, not because you're guilty of anything real, but because you've been conditioned to feel guilty. The power of guilt-seeding lies in its subtlety. It doesn't usually come in the form of direct accusations. Instead, it shows up as carefully chosen words, sighs, silences, or reminders that twist your emotions. For example, a parent might say, "After everything I've done for you, is this how you repay me?" A friend might remark, "I guess I just care more about this friendship than you do." A partner might mutter, "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine alone." On the surface, these may seem like casual comments, but beneath them is a sharp blade, the suggestion that you're selfish, ungrateful, or neglectful. The guilt seeps in slowly, reshaping how you see yourself. Guilt-seeding is particularly effective because human beings are wired to care about social bonds. We don't want to be seen as selfish or careless. Our conscience drives us to maintain harmony. Manipulators twist this natural empathy into a weapon, forcing you to carry burdens that belong to them. Over time, the seeds they plant grow into entire forests of guilt, leaving you constantly second-guessing yourself, over-explaining your actions, and apologizing for things that don't require apologies. This tactic often thrives in family dynamics. A controlling parent may seed guilt by reminding you of sacrifices. The third step is to build self-trust. The stronger your inner compass, the harder it is for guilt seeds to take root. If you know your intentions are good, you won't be as easily swayed by manipulative guilt. Boundaries are essential here. You can acknowledge someone's feelings without accepting false blame. Guilt-seeding can even be turned into a lesson in self-awareness. Once you see how easily emotions can be planted, you start questioning not just guilt, but other emotions too: fear, shame, obligation. You learn to ask, is this feeling truly mine, or was it planted in me by someone else? That question alone can uproot manipulation before it grows. At its heart, guilt-seeding is about control through conscience. It exploits the best part of human nature, our capacity for empathy, and twists it into chains. But once you recognize the seeds for what they are, you don't have to water them. You can let them wither, starve them of attention, and plant your own seeds instead. Seeds of self-respect, clarity, and freedom. In the end, guilt-seeding only works if you allow it to grow unchecked. Awareness is your sunlight, boundaries are your soil, and self-trust is your water. With these, no manipulator can turn your compassion into captivity. False consensus effect. The false consensus effect is a powerful psychological bias that convinces us that our thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors are far more common than they actually are. In other words, we assume that most people see the world the way we do. If we like something, we believe others must like it too. If we hold a certain opinion, we believe it represents the majority. This bias makes our worldview feel normal, safe, and widely accepted, but in reality, it often isolates us from truth. This effect works because human beings naturally crave belonging. From early childhood, we look for cues that tell us whether we are normal or different. Believing that others agree with us reduces anxiety, strengthens confidence, and makes us feel less alone. The brain doesn't like uncertainty, so it fills in the gaps by assuming consensus. But this assumption can be wildly inaccurate, and manipulators know how to exploit it. Imagine someone who cheats on their taxes saying, "Everyone does it," or someone who mistreats their partner claiming, "That's just how relationships are." These statements aren't based on fact, they're based on the false consensus effect. By convincing themselves that their behavior is normal, people shield themselves from guilt. And when they say it to others, they plant the idea that resistance is abnormal, making compliance feel safer. Marketers use this effect constantly. Advertisements boast phrases like, "Most people choose this brand," or "Join millions who already love our product." These claims may be exaggerated, but the suggestion of consensus makes people feel they're aligning with the majority. Social media amplifies this effect by showing likes, shares, and trends, making it seem like certain opinions or behaviors dominate the culture, even when they don't. Politics and propaganda also rely heavily on the false consensus effect. Leader. The third step is awareness of manipulation. When someone insists everyone thinks this way, treat it as a red flag. Consensus claims are often used to shut down debate, not to represent truth. If there is no evidence, assume exaggeration. Real consensus doesn't need to shout. It reveals itself in facts, not in pressure. On a personal level, recognizing this effect can also free you from false guilt. You don't have to conform just because someone claims the majority agrees with them. Popularity does not equal truth. Normal does not equal healthy. The false consensus effect may try to convince you otherwise, but your values, not imaginary consensus, should guide your choices. At its heart, the false consensus effect shows how much humans fear isolation. We cling to the belief that others think like us because it makes the world feel less lonely. But true strength comes from realizing that your worth is not defined by numbers or consensus. Sometimes the crowd is wrong. Sometimes being different is the most powerful thing you can be. In the end, the false consensus effect is an illusion of safety. It tells you, you're not alone, everyone agrees with you. But the truth is more complex. Sometimes you will stand in the minority. Sometimes you will stand alone. And in those moments, recognizing the illusion of false consensus will give you the courage to stand firm in your own truth, no matter how many disagree. Forced commitment. Forced commitment is a psychological tactic that traps people into agreements, responsibilities, or choices they didn't freely make. At its core, it's about creating situations where saying no feels impossible, or so costly that the person gives in against their true desires. Once trapped, the victim begins to feel obligated, even if the original commitment was never voluntary. Over time, this creates cycles of pressure, guilt, and compliance, all disguised as choice. This technique works because of how human beings value consistency. We like to see ourselves as reliable, honorable, and true to our word. Manipulators exploit this by maneuvering people into commitments, knowing that once someone agrees, even reluctantly, they'll often follow through just to avoid the discomfort of appearing inconsistent. It's not genuine dedication, but coerced loyalty. Think about a salesperson who pushes you into a free trial, then subtly shifts the expectation. Since you've already started, you'll want to continue, right? Or consider a friend who corners you with, "You're free tomorrow, aren't you? Great, you can help me move." By framing it as a done deal before you've agreed, they box you into compliance. Your instinct to avoid conflict or awkwardness makes you nod along, even when you'd rather say no. In relationships, forced commitment can be deeply manipulative. A partner may pressure you into promises too early. "If you love me, you'll move in with me," or "prove you're serious by doing this." The commitment isn't built on trust, but on emotional blackmail. Once given, it becomes a chain. Any hesitation afterward is framed as betrayal, even though the promise was extracted unfairly. Over time, the victim feels suffocated, carrying obligations that were never freely chosen. Families often use this tactic as well. A parent might insist, "After everything I've..." The second step is to give yourself permission to delay. If you feel pressured, say, "I need time to think about it." Manipulators thrive on urgency, pushing you into quick commitments. By slowing down, you take back power. True commitments can withstand reflection. Manipulative ones usually collapse when not answered immediately. The third step is to strengthen your boundaries. Learn to say no without apology. You don't owe anyone endless explanations for protecting your time, energy, or values. If a relationship or environment punishes you for saying no, it may not be healthy to begin with. Forced commitment isn't always malicious. Sometimes people pressure without realizing it. But whether intentional or not, the effect is the same: a loss of freedom. Genuine commitment must always come from choice, not coercion. Anything else is control dressed up as loyalty. At its heart, forced commitment reminds us of a vital truth. Obligation without choice is not commitment, it's captivity. Real dedication is powerful only when it's voluntary, when it comes from alignment with your values and desires. When someone tries to corner you into a promise, remember this: you have the right to walk away. You have the right to change your mind. You have the right to say no. In the end, forced commitment thrives on silence and compliance. But once you see the tactic clearly, you can step out of the trap. You can reclaim your voice, your choices, and your freedom. Commitment is beautiful when it's given freely, but when it's forced, it's nothing more than chains. Deliberate misinterpretation. Deliberate misinterpretation is one of the most frustrating and destructive manipulation tactics. At its core, it involves twisting someone's words, intentions, or actions into something they never meant, on purpose. Instead of engaging with the real message, the manipulator pretends to misunderstand it, reframes it negatively, or distorts it into a weapon. The goal is not clarity, it's control. By deliberately misinterpreting you, they put you on the defensive, forcing you to explain, justify, or even doubt yourself. This tactic works because most people value being understood. We want our words and feelings to be taken in good faith. When someone twists them, it feels like an attack on our very identity. We rush to defend ourselves, pouring more energy into clarifying than into holding our original position. The manipulator doesn't need to disprove you. They just need to misrepresent you until you start questioning yourself. Think of a partner who hears you say, "I wish we spent more time together," and responds with, "Oh, so now I'm a terrible partner who never gives you attention." That's not what you said. But by exaggerating and twisting your words, they turn themselves into the victim and you into the aggressor. Now, instead of addressing the original concern, you're stuck backpedaling. "No, I didn't mean that." The conversation has been hijacked. Deliberate misinterpretation also thrives in workplaces. Imagine telling your boss, "I think this project needs more time." Instead of addressing the concern, they snap back, "So you're saying I don't know how to manage deadlines?" By twisting your input into an attack on their competence, they shut down the discussion. The real issue, needing more time, gets buried under the emotional reaction they manufactured. Manipulators also use this tactic to control narratives in larger settings. Polity. The third step is to redirect responsibility. If someone insists on twisting your words, put the burden back on them. "It sounds like you're interpreting it differently than I intended. Can you explain why?" This shifts the focus away from your defense and onto their distortion. Manipulators thrive when you're defensive. They weaken when they're forced to explain. It's also important to trust yourself. One of the long-term effects of deliberate misinterpretation is self-doubt. Victims start wondering, maybe I didn't say it clearly? Maybe I am the problem. This erosion of confidence is exactly what manipulators want. The antidote is to trust your own clarity. If you know what you meant, hold on to it firmly. Their distortion doesn't define your truth. Deliberate misinterpretation can sometimes be unconscious. Some people twist words because of insecurity or hypersensitivity. But when it becomes a pattern, especially in manipulative relationships, it's a weapon. It's designed to silence, control, and exhaust you. At its heart, deliberate misinterpretation reveals how language can be used as both bridge and blade. Honest communication builds connection. Twisted communication cuts it down. The difference lies in intention. Once you learn to see the twist for what it is, you stop playing the manipulator's game. In the end, deliberate misinterpretation is about control through distortion. But truth doesn't need to scream, and clarity doesn't need to apologize. Sometimes the strongest response is not endless explanation. It's standing firm in your meaning, refusing to be twisted into someone else's story. Confession triggers. Confession triggers are psychological techniques designed to make people reveal information they would normally keep hidden. Instead of forcing the truth through direct confrontation, manipulators create conditions where a person feels compelled to confess on their own. These triggers exploit guilt, pressure, authority, or even false comfort, leading people to open up more than they ever intended. On the surface, it looks voluntary, but in reality, it's carefully engineered manipulation. One of the most common confession triggers is silence. Skilled interrogators or manipulators will ask a question, then fall completely quiet. The silence becomes unbearable, and the other person feels pressured to fill it with words, often revealing more than they planned. Humans are uncomfortable with long pauses in conversation, and silence weaponizes that discomfort into disclosure. Another confession trigger is false evidence. For example, in police interrogations, officers might claim, "We already have proof," or "Your friend already told us everything." Even if this isn't true, the suggestion of evidence breaks down resistance. The person feels trapped and believes confessing is their only option. Manipulators know that the perception of inevitability is sometimes more powerful than actual proof. Guilt is also a powerful confession trigger. A partner might say, "I just need you to be honest with me. I can forgive anything except lies." This creates the illusion of safety, making the other person more likely to confess, even if the promise of forgiveness is false. Parents sometimes use similar tactics, saying, "If you tell me the truth, you won't get in trouble," only to punish the confession afterward. The manipulator doesn't seek honesty, they seek control. Another common tactic is framing the confession as a shared experience. A manipulator might admit to a SME. The third step is to practice controlled responses. Instead of rushing to fill silences or explain yourself, allow the discomfort to sit. A simple answer like, "That's not something I want to talk about right now," protects your boundaries without feeding manipulation. Confession triggers can also teach us something important. Honesty is powerful, but it must be given freely. Truth shared under pressure isn't intimacy, it's extraction. Vulnerability is a gift, not a debt. At its core, confession triggers reveal how fragile human communication can be. We long to be understood, we long to be believed, and we long to be forgiven. Manipulators exploit those desires, turning them into traps. But once you see the trap, you no longer have to step into it. In the end, the most important truth is this: you don't owe anyone your confession. What you share, and when you share it, must always remain your choice. Real trust doesn't demand, it invites. And anything else is not love, not honesty, but manipulation. Pacing and leading is a psychological technique often used in persuasion, negotiation, and manipulation. At its core, it begins with pacing, matching another person's behavior, emotions, or worldview so closely that they feel deeply understood. Once trust and rapport are established, the manipulator shifts into leading, subtly guiding the person toward new thoughts, feelings, or actions that serve the manipulator's agenda. It's like stepping in rhythm with someone until they unconsciously let you steer the dance. This tactic is powerful because humans naturally feel safer with those who mirror them. When someone reflects our tone, posture, or values, our brain registers them as like us. This creates comfort and lowers defenses. Manipulators know that if they can pace effectively, the target will accept them as an ally, making it easier to introduce influence. Consider a salesperson meeting a skeptical customer. Instead of pushing their product immediately, they first mirror the customer's concerns. "I get it. Prices are too high and you don't want to waste money." By pacing the customer's mindset, they build trust. Then comes the leading, but that's why this option is actually the safest long-term investment. The transition feels seamless because the manipulator first aligned themselves with the customer's perspective before redirecting it. In relationships, pacing and leading can be subtle but potent. A manipulative partner might start by validating your emotions. "You're right. You've been under so much stress lately." This pacing makes you feel seen and understood. Then they lead with a suggestion. "That's why it would be best if you leaned on me more and stopped talking to your friends about your problems." What began as empathy shifts into control. Because the pacing felt so genuine, the leading goes unquestioned. Politicians also use this technique. At its heart, pacing and leading reveals how influence works best, not through force, but through alignment. People don't follow those who ignore them, they follow those who reflect them. This makes the technique both powerful and dangerous. It can heal, or it can exploit, depending on the hands that use it. In the end, pacing and leading teaches a critical lesson. Just because someone seems to understand you doesn't mean they have your best interest at heart. Understanding can be a bridge to connection or a doorway to control. The key is to look at where that bridge leads, toward your freedom or toward someone else's agenda. Decoy Effect. The decoy effect is a clever and often invisible manipulation tactic that shapes the way we make choices. At its core, it works by presenting an extra, strategically designed option, the decoy, that makes one of the other options look far more appealing than it would have on its own. The decoy isn't meant to be chosen. Its only purpose is to push you toward the option the manipulator wants you to pick. To understand this, imagine going to the cinema and choosing between a small popcorn for $4 and a large for $7. Many people would hesitate. The large feels expensive, the small feels too little. Then a third option appears, a medium popcorn for $6.50. Suddenly, the large looks like a bargain. The medium is the decoy, created to make the large feel like the smartest choice. You think you're being rational, but in reality, your perception has been manipulated. Marketers and businesses use the decoy effect constantly. Subscription services are a classic example. You might see 3 plans. Basic for $10, premium for $30, and standard for $28. Very few people pick the standard. It exists to push you toward the premium. Restaurants design menus with overpriced dishes not to sell them, but to make slightly cheaper meals look more attractive. Even technology companies use decoy pricing, introducing mid-tier models no one buys, simply to make the high-end option look justified. The psychological power of the decoy effect comes from how the human brain makes comparisons. We don't evaluate options in isolation. We evaluate them relative to one another. By introducing a decoy, manipulators control the frame of comparison. They don't change the real value of the choices. They change how we perceive the value, and perception is often stronger than reality. The decoy effect also shows up in relationships and social dynamics. A manipulative person might present you with two. So how do you defend yourself? The first step is to slow down your decision-making. When presented with multiple options, ask, would I still choose this if the other options weren't here? If your preference only makes sense in comparison, you may be falling for a decoy. The second step is to evaluate needs, not options. Ask yourself what you truly need or value before looking at what's offered. When you define your priorities first, decoys lose their power. For example, if you know you only need basic features in a product, no cleverly priced premium plan will trick you into overspending. The third step is to recognize extremes. If one option looks unusually bad or oddly placed, it may not be real. It may be a decoy. Be wary of choices that seem designed to steer you toward another. The decoy effect isn't always harmful. It can be used for positive purposes, like nudging people toward healthier food options or more sustainable choices. But in most cases, it serves the manipulator, not the consumer. Its subtlety makes it dangerous because the best manipulations are the ones you never notice happening. At its heart, the decoy effect reveals a truth about human psychology. We don't just want the best option, we want the option that feels better than the others. Manipulators exploit this craving for relative value, shaping decisions without ever taking away choice. In the end, the decoy effect is about hidden influence. You think you're choosing freely, but someone has already set the stage. True freedom comes when you step off that stage, refusing to compare within the limits they've designed. Instead of asking which option looks best, ask which option is truly right for you. That single shift transforms manipulation into empowerment.
False equivalence. False equivalence is a deceptive reasoning tactic that manipulates people by comparing two things as if they are equal, when in reality they are not. On the surface, it seems logical. If two situations look similar, then the same judgment or standard should apply. But beneath that surface, false equivalence hides critical differences. It's a way of blurring distinctions, creating confusion, and steering people toward false conclusions. The technique works because human beings love shortcuts in thinking. We simplify the world by drawing comparisons. This is like that. But manipulators exploit this by making comparisons that are emotionally persuasive but logically flawed. They frame two unequal things as identical, hoping you won't notice the missing details that separate them. A common example is in arguments about morality. Someone might say, lying to protect someone's feelings is just as bad as lying to commit fraud. On the surface, both involve lying, but the intent, impact, and context are completely different. The comparison creates a false equivalence, making two vastly different actions appear equally wrong. This kind of reasoning shuts down nuance and forces black and white judgments where gray areas matter most. False equivalence is everywhere in politics. One side might argue, both parties are equally corrupt, ignoring the fact that the scale, type, or consequences of corruption may be drastically different. By painting all sides as the same, manipulators create apathy. If everything is equally bad, why bother resisting any of it? This tactic benefits those in power because it keeps people passive under the illusion of fairness. Media also thrives on false equivalence. In an effort to appear balanced, news outlets may present two sides of an issue as if they are equally valid, even when one side is backed by overwhelming evidence A, and the other is based on misinformation. For example, presenting climate scientists and climate change deniers as equal voices creates the illusion of debate where the facts are already settled. False balance disguises manipulation as fairness. In relationships, false equivalence often emerges during conflict. A manipulative partner might say, "You forgot to text me back and I yelled at you. We both made mistakes." Here, forgetting to send a message is equated with verbal aggression, as though both carry the same weight. This shifts blame away from the manipulator, equalizing harm that is not truly equal. Victims who fall for this reasoning end up apologizing for things that don't compare, while the manipulator escapes accountability. The danger of false equivalence is that it erodes critical thinking. By making everything seem the same, it prevents people from distinguishing severity, intent, or consequence. It thrives on flattening complexity into oversimplified comparisons. Over time, this creates cynicism, apathy, and confusion. People stop fighting injustice because they've been convinced that everyone's just as bad. They stop demanding accountability because they believe mistakes are all equal. So, how do you defend against false equivalence? The first step is to slow down comparisons. When someone says two things are the same, ask, are they really? What differences matter here? Look for distinctions in scale, intent, context, and consequence. If those differences exist, then the equivalence is false. The second step is to refuse false balance. Just because two perspectives exist doesn't mean they carry equal weight. Truth is not divided evenly between sides. It rests where evidence, logic, and integrity point. Don't let someone convince you that giving equal time to unequal claims is fairness. It's not balance, it's distortion. The third step is to trust your sense of proportion. Not all mistakes are equal. Not all harms are the same. A forgotten chore is not the same as betrayal. A white lie is not the same as systemic deception. When you keep perspective, you don't allow manipulative comparisons to distort your judgment. False equivalence is not always malicious. Sometimes it's just lazy thinking. But in the hands of manipulators, it becomes a weapon. It silences dissent, minimizes abuse, and excuses wrongdoing. It turns complexity into a smokescreen, making it harder for people to see the truth. At its core, false equivalence reveals a dangerous truth. People can be persuaded not by facts, but by appearances of fairness. The manipulator doesn't need to prove they're right. They only need to convince you that everyone is equally wrong. And once that illusion takes root, accountability vanishes. In the end, false equivalence is a distortion of truth dressed as logic. It pretends to be balanced, but it blinds you to reality. The way to break free is simple but difficult. Hold on to nuance, trust evidence, and refuse to accept that all wrongs are equal, because they're not. Some are heavier, darker, and far more destructive, and pretending otherwise only serves those who benefit from the lie.